Some things disappear without anyone noticing until someone checks the list twice. Blue Mesa sits in the northern stretch of the Petrified Forest, a crumbling badland of banded clay and ancient stone that shifts color with the angle of the sun. The terrain is soft underfoot, prone to erosion, striped in shades of gray and rust that give the place an exposed skeletal quality. It has been part of the National Monument System since 1906, though few people visited in the early decades. The area was remote then, accessible only by dirt roads that washed out in summer storms. It still feels remote now. The silence there is notable. Wind moves across the mesa without obstruction, but it rarely makes sound. In the early 1930s, the federal government launched a broad effort to catalog natural resources across the Southwest. Surveyors were sent into public lands with tape measures, notebooks, and cameras. Their job was inventory, nothing more. They counted trees, measured water sources, and marked geological features on standardized forms. It was dull, methodical work, the kind that required patience and an eye for detail. One of those surveyors was a man named Harold Wickham. He worked for the Department of the Interior and had spent most of his career documenting prairie land in Kansas and Nebraska. In the spring of 1934, he was assigned a grid in the Petrified Forest. His task was to catalog every petrified log larger than 5 feet in a quarter-mile section of Blue Mesa. He worked alone for 3 weeks. Wickham's report, filed in June of 1934, was thorough. He documented 47 logs. Each entry included measurements, estimated weight, mineral composition, and GPS coordinates taken with a surveyor's transit. His photographs were sharp and methodical. He labeled each log with a chalk number and photographed it from multiple angles. The report itself was typed on government letterhead and stored in a filing cabinet in Santa Fe. For 18 years, no one looked at it again. In 1952, the Park Service initiated a new mapping effort. Technologies had improved. Aerial photography was now standard, and the Park Service wanted updated records for all protected lands. A team of 3 rangers was assigned to resurvey Wickham's original grid. They carried his report with them, along with his photographs and coordinates. They found 31 logs. The discrepancy was noticed immediately. The lead ranger, a man named Thomas Aldridge, double-checked the coordinates. The grid was correct. The terrain matched Wickham's photographs. But 16 logs were missing. There were no tire tracks, no drag marks, no depressions in the clay where something heavy had been moved. Petrified wood is dense, denser than most stone. A single log can weigh several hundred pounds per foot. The 16 missing specimens, based on Wickham's measurements, would have totaled more than 12 tons. Moving them would have required machinery, permits, and a crew. There were no records of any kind. Aldridge wrote a memo to his supervisor. The memo was polite and factual. It noted the discrepancy and requested clarification. He received no reply. A retired ranger named Evelyn Marsh, who worked in the Petrified Forest from 1955 to 1973, later said that Aldridge's memo circulated quietly among staff, but was never formally investigated. She recalled the incident being mentioned once during a training session in 1956. Someone asked if logs could be stolen, she said, in an interview conducted in 2008. The answer was always the same: too heavy, no roads, no reason. She paused before adding, but no one ever said where they went. Wickham's original report surfaced again in 1967 when a geology student named Martin Delgado requested access to historical survey data for a thesis on erosion patterns. Delgado was studying how petrified logs shift over time due to natural forces: rain, wind, freeze-thaw cycles. He noticed Wickham's margin notes almost immediately. The notes were small, written in pencil along the edges of several pages. They were not part of the official documentation. Most were measurements or reminders, the kind of shorthand a surveyor might use in the field. But on 3 pages, Wickham had drawn crude diagrams. They showed clusters of logs with arrows between them. Beneath one diagram, he had written, "Noted alignment shift, rechecked 3 times." Beneath another, "Possible subsurface movement." The third diagram had no annotation at all, just a series of arrows forming a rough spiral. Delgado attempted to contact Wickham to ask about the notes. He discovered that Wickham had died in 1941, 7 years after completing the survey. The cause of death was listed as heart failure. He was 53 years old. Delgado included a footnote about the missing logs in his thesis, but his advisor suggested removing it. "It's not relevant to erosion," the advisor reportedly told him. Delgado complied. The footnote was cut. He never published anything else about the Petrified Forest. In 1976, a Park Service archaeologist named Dr. Raymond Ibarra conducted a soil composition study in the same area. His work had nothing to do with the missing logs, but he was aware of the discrepancy. Ibarra had read Aldridge's memo years earlier and was curious. He took core samples from several locations where Wickham's photographs showed logs that no longer existed. The soil beneath those locations was undisturbed. Ibarra's samples showed no sign of excavation, no voids, no compression patterns that would indicate something heavy had been removed. The stratification was consistent with the surrounding terrain. He wrote a brief report noting this and filed it with the park's research archive. He did not pursue the matter further. A journalist named Lisa Brennan encountered the story in 1998 while researching an article about theft from national parks. She obtained copies of Wickham's report and Aldridge's memo through a Freedom of Information Act request. She also tracked down Thomas Aldridge, who was still alive and living in Flagstaff. Aldridge was 81 at the time. He remembered the survey clearly. "We thought maybe they'd been cataloged wrong," he told Brennan. "But the photographs matched, the numbers matched. We even found the chalk marks on some of the logs that were still there." He paused for a long moment before continuing. "The thing that stayed with me was how clean it was. If someone had moved them, there'd be evidence. Machinery leaves marks. People leave marks. There was nothing." Brennan asked if he'd ever gone back to check. Aldridge shook his head. "I was reassigned 2 months later, sent to Sequoia. It wasn't a punishment or anything like that, just normal rotation. But I always wondered if someone wanted me somewhere else." Brennan's article was never published. The magazine she worked for folded in 1999, and the piece remained in her files. She mentioned it once in a blog post in 2004, but provided no details. In 2011, a team of geologists from the University of Arizona conducted a study on subsurface magnetism in the Petrified Forest. Their work had no connection to the missing logs, but their survey grid overlapped with Wickham's original section. They detected faint magnetic anomalies in 3 locations. The anomalies were weak and inconsistent, appearing and disappearing over the course of several days. The team noted them in their data, but could not identify a source. Natural magnetism in petrified wood is not uncommon, but the readings were difficult to replicate. One of the researchers, Dr. Anika Okoye, mentioned the anomalies during a conference presentation in 2012. She was asked if the readings could be related to missing material. She said she didn't know what the question meant. When it was explained to her, she replied, "We weren't measuring absence." The Park Service conducted its most recent inventory of Blue Mesa in 2018. The count remains at 31 logs within Wickham's original grid. No new logs have appeared. No additional logs have disappeared. The 16 that vanished between 1934 and 1952 are still gone. Wickham's photographs are stored in a climate-controlled archive in Tucson. The images are clear. The logs are visible, numbered in chalk, heavy and immovable against the banded clay. In one photograph, taken at an angle, the shadow of a log stretches long across the ground. The shadow is sharp. In another photograph, taken from the same position 18 years later, the shadow is gone. Some stones hold heat longer than they should, and no one knows why they stop. Crystal Forest Trail winds through one of the most concentrated deposits of petrified wood in Arizona. The trail is short, less than a mile in total length, looping through a landscape of fractured quartz and agate that glitters in direct sunlight. The logs here are among the oldest in the park, dating back to the late Triassic period, roughly 220 million years ago. They are not wood anymore. Time and mineral replacement have turned them into stone, silica deposits filling the spaces where cellulose once existed. They are cold to the touch, dense, and geologically inert. The area was designated part of the National Monument in 1906, though it remained largely undeveloped until the mid-20th century. Foot traffic increased after the construction of a paved trail in 1962. Rangers began conducting regular patrols to prevent theft and vandalism. Petrified wood, despite its protected status, has long been a target for collectors. Pieces go missing every year, small enough to fit in a pocket or backpack. The Park Service has dealt with this problem since the beginning. In the summer of 1978, a seasonal ranger named David Kowalski noticed something unusual during a routine patrol. He had been walking the trail in the late afternoon, checking for litter and broken fencing. The air temperature was 94 degrees. He stopped to rest near a large petrified log, roughly 8 feet long and 2 feet in diameter, lying horizontal across a patch of exposed sandstone. He placed his hand on the surface. It was warm, warmer than he expected given the shade from a nearby outcrop. Kowalski carried a standard infrared thermometer as part of his equipment. Rangers used them occasionally to check surface temperatures on rocks and soil, mostly out of curiosity, or to monitor heat stress conditions for visitors. He pointed the device at the log. The reading came back at 106 degrees. He checked the ambient air temperature, 94. He waited a few minutes and tested again, 105. He moved to another log 10 feet away. The surface temperature matched the air. He returned to the first log, 106. Kowalski filed a brief note in his daily report. He mentioned the temperature discrepancy but offered no theory. He assumed it was an equipment error or some quirk of solar absorption. He didn't think much of it. 3 weeks later, another ranger named Margaret Solis conducted the same patrol route. She had read Kowalski's note and brought her own thermometer. She found the same log. The air temperature that day was 87 degrees. The log read 99. She tested it multiple times over the course of an hour. The temperature held steady, never dropping below 98 degrees even as the sun moved and the shade deepened. Solis expanded the survey. She tested every accessible log along the trail, most registered temperatures consistent with their surroundings, but 4 logs showed the same anomaly. Each was between 8 and 12 degrees warmer than ambient air. The readings were consistent across multiple visits over the next 2 months. By the fall of 1978, the anomaly had been documented by 6 different rangers. Park administrators were notified. A geologist from the University of Arizona, Dr. Philip Travers, was invited to conduct an assessment. He arrived in November with a team of 3 graduate students. They spent 5 days on site, taking measurements, drilling small core samples, and testing soil composition around the affected logs. Travers found no explanation. The logs contained the same mineral composition as others in the area, primarily quartz and chalcedony with trace amounts of iron oxide. There was no detectable radioactivity, no unusual electromagnetic readings, and no subsurface heat sources. The temperature differential remained. He recorded it carefully, checked his instruments, and tested control samples from logs that showed no anomaly. Everything functioned as expected. "It's not geothermal," Travers said in a report submitted to the Park Service in December of 1978. "There's no volcanic activity in this region, no hot springs, no fault lines that would explain localized heat. The logs themselves are mineralogically identical to those around them. The heat has no identifiable source." One of his graduate students, a woman named Rebecca Galloway, later said the experience unsettled her. "We kept expecting to find something," she said, in an interview conducted in 2003. "A crack in the rock, a pocket of warm air, something. But there was nothing. The heat was just there, and it didn't radiate outward the way heat normally does. You could put your hand on the log and feel it, but 6 inches away, the air was normal temperature. It didn't make sense." The Park Service decided to install permanent monitoring equipment. In March of 1982, a team from the U.S. Geological Survey arrived with digital thermometers, data loggers, and mounting hardware. They selected 3 of the affected logs and installed sensors that would record temperatures every 15 minutes. The equipment was calibrated and tested. Everything worked. The anomaly stopped. Within 48 hours of installation, all 3 logs registered temperatures consistent with ambient air. The sensors functioned correctly. The logs were unchanged, but the heat was gone. The team removed the equipment, waited a week, and tested manually. The logs remained normal. They reinstalled the sensors. The readings stayed normal. They tested every other log on the trail. None showed elevated temperatures, except one. A log near the southern end of the trail, roughly 6 feet long and heavily fractured, continued to register temperatures 8 to 10 degrees above ambient. It had not been part of the original group of 4. Rangers had not noticed it before. The USGS team installed a sensor on it. The temperature remained elevated for 6 weeks. Then, on May 4, 1982, the log cracked further along an existing fracture line. It was deemed unstable and potentially hazardous to visitors. Park Service policy required its removal. A maintenance crew transported the log to a storage facility near the park headquarters. It was placed on a concrete pad in an open-air shed alongside other removed specimens. Within 24 hours, its temperature normalized. It has remained normal ever since. Dr. Leonard Pritchard, a geophysicist who reviewed the data in 1984, found the sequence of events difficult to categorize. "You have a measurable, repeatable phenomenon that ceases the moment you attempt to study it systematically," he wrote in a letter to the Park Service. "That's not typical of natural processes. Natural processes don't respond to observation. They continue regardless of whether anyone is watching." He noted that the one exception, the log that maintained heat until it was moved, suggested the anomaly might be location-dependent rather than object-dependent. But when the Park Service tested the ground where that log had been, they found nothing unusual. The soil temperature was normal. The surrounding logs were normal. Pritchard recommended further study, but was not granted funding. His proposal was reviewed and declined without explanation. He did not pursue the matter further. A retired ranger named Carl Edmonds, who worked at the Petrified Forest from 1976 to 1994, said the incident was discussed among staff for years. "People had theories," he said in 2009. "Solar focusing, mineral decay, underground water, none of it fit. The thing that bothered people most was that it stopped when we tried to measure it, like it knew." He paused before adding, "We were told not to talk about it with visitors. Not officially, just don't bring it up." The monitoring equipment was removed in 1983. The data logs were filed with the park's research archive. No follow-up studies were conducted. Requests from outside researchers were quietly declined. The Park Service issued no public statements. In 2007, a journalist named Thomas Whitaker attempted to access the original data through a Freedom of Information Act request. He received a response stating that the records were part of ongoing resource management and not available for public release. He filed an appeal. The appeal was denied. The logs remain on Crystal Forest Trail. Thousands of visitors walk past them every year. The Park Service conducts temperature surveys occasionally as part of routine environmental monitoring. All readings have been normal since 1982. The log that was moved to storage is still there, sitting on a concrete pad in a shed behind the maintenance building. It is labeled with a reference number and a date. The label does not mention why it was removed. Someone checked its temperature in 2015. It was 68 degrees. The air temperature that day was 68 degrees. No one has checked since. Sound travels differently through stone than through air, and sometimes it comes from places that should be silent. Agate Bridge is one of the most photographed features in the Petrified Forest. It spans a narrow ravine in the northern section of the park, a single petrified log stretching 110 feet across open space. The log is massive, nearly 4 feet in diameter at its thickest point, composed almost entirely of quartz and agate that formed over millions of years as groundwater replaced organic material molecule by molecule. It rests on natural stone abutments at either end, suspended roughly 40 feet above the ravine floor. The formation is natural, though it was reinforced with concrete supports in 1911 after concerns that erosion might destabilize the log. Those supports remain visible but unobtrusive, tucked beneath the log's center point. The ravine below is shallow and dry most of the year, filled with loose sediment and scattered fragments of petrified wood. Nothing grows there. The soil is alkaline and compacted. Water flows through only during heavy rains, carving temporary channels that disappear within hours. The bridge has been a landmark since the park's establishment. Early visitors carved their initials into the softer stone surrounding it, a practice that was common before preservation laws were enforced. Photographs from the early 1900s show the log in nearly the same position it occupies now, weathered but stable, spanning the gap like a monument to deep time. In the spring of 1967, a graduate student from Arizona State University named Jeffrey Brennan arrived at the Petrified Forest to conduct a study on acoustic properties of mineralized wood. His thesis focused on how sound waves propagate through petrified logs compared to living timber. He carried a portable reel-to-reel tape recorder, contact microphones, and a set of tuning forks calibrated to specific frequencies. His plan was to record vibrations at various points along several large logs and analyze the results in a lab. Brennan spent 2 weeks in the park. He worked mostly alone, setting up equipment at different sites during early morning hours when visitor traffic was minimal. On April 23rd, he positioned contact microphones along the underside of Agate Bridge, attaching them with adhesive pads designed not to damage the stone. He activated the recorder and struck the log with a rubber mallet at measured intervals, documenting how the vibrations traveled through the structure. The session lasted 90 minutes. Brennan packed his equipment and returned to his vehicle. He did not review the recordings until 3 days later, back in his apartment in Tempe. The tape contained what he expected: clear tones from his mallet strikes, the resonance of silica conducting sound, ambient wind noise. But beneath those sounds, audible during gaps between his test strikes, was something else: a rhythmic tapping. 3 beats, a pause, 3 beats again. It repeated for approximately 12 minutes, then stopped. Brennan assumed it was interference, perhaps vibrations from a passing vehicle or visitor footsteps on the trail above the ravine. He noted it in his log, but did not consider it significant. He returned to the park on May 2nd to repeat the test. This time, he recorded for 2 hours without striking the log at all, letting the microphones capture ambient sound. The tapping occurred again, same rhythm, same duration. It began 47 minutes into the recording and lasted 11 minutes. Brennan checked the area around the bridge. No one was nearby. The trail was empty. He examined the concrete supports, thinking expansion or contraction might produce sound. The supports were cool to the touch, stable, showing no signs of movement. He recorded a third session on May 9th. The tapping did not occur. He tried again on May 14th. It was there, clearer this time, beginning 32 minutes into the session. Brennan documented the barometric pressure during each recording. The tapping occurred only when pressure readings fell within a narrow range, between 29.6 and 29.8 inches of mercury. He submitted a preliminary report to his advisor in June, including audio samples and pressure data. The advisor, Dr. Harold Vesper, found the recordings interesting but inconclusive. Could be thermal expansion in the concrete, Vesper wrote in his notes. Could be subsurface settling. Need more data. Brennan graduated later that year and took a position with an engineering firm in California. He did not return to the Petrified Forest. His recordings were filed with his thesis materials at the university library. In the summer of 1968, a Park Service ranger named Dolores Ramirez heard about Brennan's recordings from a colleague who had read his thesis. Ramirez had worked at the park for 6 years and knew the bridge well. She was skeptical but curious. She borrowed a tape recorder from the park's audiovisual department and spent an afternoon at the bridge with her own equipment. She recorded the tapping. 3 beats, a pause, 3 beats. It lasted 9 minutes. The barometric pressure that day was 29.7. Ramirez reported the incident to her supervisor, who forwarded it to the regional office in Santa Fe. In January of 1969, a team from the U.S. Geological Survey arrived to conduct an assessment. The team included 2 geologists, an acoustic specialist, and a structural engineer. They spent 4 days on site, recording audio, measuring vibrations, and inspecting the bridge and surrounding terrain. They confirmed the phenomenon. The tapping occurred during their 2nd and 4th days on site, both times when barometric pressure fell within the identified range. The sound appeared to originate beneath the bridge, but pinpointing an exact source proved difficult. The acoustic specialist, a man named Dr. Vincent Moretti, described it as subsurface, but could not elaborate further without additional data. The team recommended exploratory drilling. Permission was granted in March. On April 8, 1969, a drilling crew used a portable rig to bore 3 test holes in the ravine floor, directly beneath the bridge. The holes were 8 inches in diameter, extending to depths of 20, 35, and 50 feet respectively. They found sediment, compacted clay, sand, and fragments of silica. No voids, no cavities, no water. The cores were removed, cataloged, and sent to a lab in Flagstaff for analysis. Results showed nothing unusual, standard sedimentary composition consistent with the region's geology. The tapping stopped after the drilling. Ramirez conducted follow-up recordings in May and June. No sound. The USGS team returned in July to verify. The phenomenon was gone, but something else had started. 3 members of the original assessment team, Moretti, one of the geologists named Dr. Patricia Lundgren, and the structural engineer, a man named Robert Kerrigan, reported experiencing similar dreams in the weeks following the drilling. All 3 described standing in water, knee-deep, in a place that resembled the ravine beneath Agate Bridge, but was filled with dark, still water that reflected no light. None of them had discussed their dreams with the others until Moretti mentioned his during a follow-up meeting in August. Lundgren confirmed she'd had the same dream, twice. Kerrigan said 3 times. All described the water as cold, viscous, and wrong in ways they could not articulate. Kerrigan said he could feel a current moving beneath the surface, even though the water appeared motionless. No formal documentation of the dreams exists in the team's official report, but Moretti mentioned them in a letter to a colleague in October of 1969. The letter, discovered in university archives in 2006, described the dreams as psychologically consistent but geologically impossible. The Park Service closed the investigation in November of 1969. The official conclusion stated that the tapping was likely caused by settling in the concrete supports, exacerbated by specific atmospheric conditions. No further studies were recommended. The drill holes were filled, and the site was left undisturbed. Brennan's original recordings remained in the university library until 1983, when they were transferred to magnetic tape as part of a preservation initiative. The tapes were digitized in 2001. A sound engineer reviewing the files for a documentary project noted that the tapping included faint harmonic overtones not typical of mechanical vibration. He described them as almost vocal, but could not identify a natural source. The Park Service has conducted no additional acoustic studies at Agate Bridge. The site remains accessible to visitors. The concrete supports installed in 1911 are still in place, showing expected weathering but no structural issues. Ramirez retired from the Park Service in 1992. In an interview conducted in 2004, she said she avoided the bridge after 1969. "I still worked that section of the park," she said, "but I didn't stop there unless I had to. It wasn't fear exactly, it was more like the place had answered a question I never should have asked." She paused before adding, "I never dreamed about water, but I thought about it. The way they described it, standing in something that wasn't supposed to be there." The recordings still exist in digital archives. The tapping can be heard clearly in the files, 3 beats and a pause, repeating with mechanical precision. The overtones are present, faint but measurable, rising and falling in patterns that sound almost deliberate. No one has returned to the bridge with recording equipment since 1969. The ravine beneath it remains dry. Some records are written before the events they describe, and no one can explain how. Newspaper rock sits along a short interpretive trail in the northern section of the Petrified Forest, a low sandstone outcrop covered with more than 650 petroglyphs. The images were carved by ancestral Puebloan people between approximately 700 and 1300 CE, etched into desert varnish, a dark mineral coating that forms on exposed rock surfaces over centuries. The carvings depict animals, human figures, geometric patterns, and symbols whose meanings remain largely unknown. Archaeologists have studied the site since the early 1900s, documenting the images through photographs, rubbings, and detailed sketches. The rock face is fragile. Desert varnish reforms slowly, and any disturbance is visible for decades. Park Service guidelines prohibit touching the petroglyphs. Fencing was installed in 1968 to keep visitors at a distance. The site is monitored regularly for vandalism, though damage has been minimal in recent years. The carvings themselves show natural weathering, but no signs of modern alteration. Among the petroglyphs are several circular patterns that researchers have long interpreted as celestial symbols, representations of the sun, moon, or star clusters. These are common motifs in Puebloan rock art, appearing at sites throughout the Southwest. Most are simple: a circle with radiating lines, a crescent shape, clusters of dots arranged in recognizable constellation patterns. They reflect what ancient peoples could observe with the naked eye, the movements of celestial bodies across predictable cycles. In the summer of 1991, Dr. Alan Hartfield, an astronomer from Northern Arizona University, visited Newspaper Rock as part of a vacation trip with his family. Hartfield specialized in orbital mechanics and had published several papers on planetary motion. He was not there in any professional capacity. He walked the trail, read the informational plaques, and took photographs like any other visitor. One petroglyph caught his attention. It showed 5 circular shapes arranged in a specific pattern, with lines connecting them in a way that suggested alignment or conjunction. The carving was located on the right side of the main panel, roughly chest height, weathered but distinct. Hartfield recognized the configuration. It resembled a planetary alignment, multiple planets visible in a narrow section of sky, a phenomenon that occurs rarely and unpredictably depending on orbital periods. He took several photographs and made a sketch in a notebook he carried. When he returned home to Flagstaff, he ran the configuration through astronomical software, inputting the positions as they appeared in the carving. The program searched historical records for matching alignments. It found nothing in the past 2,000 years. He expanded the search forward in time. The software identified OS, match scheduled for June 14, 2131, 140 years in the future. The alignment would involve Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, visible in the early evening sky in a configuration matching the petroglyph with less than 2 degrees of variance. Hartfield assumed he had made an error. He recalibrated the software and ran the search again. The result was identical. He checked his photographs against the sketch. The petroglyph matched. He contacted a colleague, Dr. Miriam Vasquez, who specialized in archaeoastronomy, the study of how ancient cultures understood and recorded celestial phenomena. He sent her the photographs and his findings. Vasquez was skeptical. She visited Newspaper Rock in October of 1991 and examined the petroglyph in person. She confirmed that the carving was genuine, consistent in weathering and style with other images on the panel. She took her own measurements and photographs. When she ran the data through independent software, she reached the same conclusion. The alignment depicted in the carving would occur in 2131. She also noted that the carving's position on the rock face, the depth of the lines, and the condition of the desert varnish all indicated it had been there for centuries. Radiocarbon dating of organic material trapped in the varnish, conducted in 1992, suggested the petroglyph was created between 900 and 1100 CE. Vasquez and Hartfield co-authored a brief paper on their findings, published in a regional journal of southwestern archaeology in 1993. The paper was cautious in tone, presenting the data without offering an explanation. It suggested the alignment might be coincidental, a geometric pattern that happened to match a future celestial event by chance. The paper received little attention outside academic circles. In 2003, a graduate student named Kevin Sosi, working on a thesis about astronomical knowledge in Puebloan cultures, reviewed Vasquez's work and decided to re-examine Newspaper Rock. Sosi was from the Navajo Nation and had grown up near the Petrified forest. He had visited the site many times as a child. He knew the petroglyphs well. Sosi spent 3 weeks photographing and cataloging every circular or geometric petroglyph on the main panel. He focused on patterns that might represent celestial events. Using updated astronomical software, he tested 18 different carvings. 15 showed no correlation with known historical alignments. 3 did. All 3 matched future events. The first, a pattern of 4 circles with intersecting lines, corresponded to a planetary alignment projected for March 9, 2174. The second, a more complex arrangement involving 7 circular shapes and a crescent, matched a rare alignment of 5 planets and a lunar eclipse scheduled for October 22, 2208. The third was a simple cluster of 3 circles that aligned with a conjunction of Venus, Jupiter, and the Moon, visible on May 3, 2156. Tsosi checked the carvings for any indication of modern alteration. He found none. The desert varnish was intact, the weathering consistent with centuries of exposure. He submitted his findings as part of his thesis in 2004. His thesis advisor, Dr. Eleanor Sato, found the results troubling. "We have 3 possibilities," she later said in an interview conducted in 2007. Either the carvings are coincidental, which strains credibility given the precision, or they've been altered in a way we cannot detect, which seems unlikely given the condition of the varnish, or the people who made these carvings had knowledge of celestial mechanics far beyond what we believe was possible for that time and culture. She paused before adding, "None of those options are satisfying." The Park Service was notified of Tsosi's findings in 2004. A review panel was convened, including archaeologists, astronomers, and a geologist specializing in rock weathering. The panel examined the site in person in November of 2005. They confirmed that the carvings were old, that the alignments were accurate, and that no explanation was immediately apparent. The panel's report, submitted in March of 2006, recommended further study but noted significant methodological challenges in explaining the phenomena without invoking anachronistic technological capabilities. The report was filed with the Parks Research Archive. No follow-up studies were authorized. A request for funding to conduct radiocarbon dating on additional petroglyphs was submitted in 2007 by Dr. Vasquez, who had remained interested in the site. The request was denied without explanation. A second request, submitted in 2009, was also denied. Tsosi attempted to publish his findings in several peer-reviewed journals between 2005 and 2008. All submissions were rejected. Reviewers cited concerns about methodology, though Tsosi later said the critiques were vague and inconsistent. One reviewer said the alignments were too precise to be coincidental, he recalled in 2012. Another said they weren't precise enough to be meaningful. It felt like no one wanted to engage with the actual data. In 2010, a team of researchers from the University of New Mexico received permission to conduct a comprehensive photographic survey of newspaper rock using high-resolution digital imaging. The survey was completed in 2011. The images were archived but not published. When a journalist requested access to the images in 2013, the request was declined, with the university citing ongoing analysis. No analysis has been published. Dr. Hartfield retired from Northern Arizona University in 2015. In a recorded interview conducted shortly before his retirement, he was asked if he still believed the petroglyphs depicted future events. "I believe the math," he said. "The alignments are real. They will happen. Whether the people who carved those images understood what they were recording or how they could have understood it, I can't say." He was asked if he planned to be alive in 2131 to see the first alignment. He shook his head. "I'll be long gone, but someone will see it, and when they do, maybe they'll come back here and ask the same questions we couldn't answer." The petroglyphs remain at Newspaper Rock, weathered and silent. Visitors walk past them daily, reading the informational plaques that describe the images as representations of daily life, spiritual beliefs, and observed natural phenomena. The plaques do not mention the alignments. The fencing installed in 1968 is still in place. The rock face is monitored for vandalism. Nothing has changed. On June 14, 2131, 5 planets will align in the early evening sky, visible to the naked eye in a configuration that matches a carving made more than 1,000 years ago. Someone will be there to see it. Shadows fall where light is blocked, except when they fall where nothing stands. Puerco Pueblo is one of the largest ancestral Puebloan sites in the Petrified Forest, a complex of over 100 rooms built along the Puerco River between 1100 and 1200 CE. The ruins sit on a low mesa overlooking what is now a dry riverbed, the walls reduced to knee-height remnants of stone and mortar that trace the outline of ancient rooms, plazas, and corridors. The site was occupied for roughly 150 years before being abandoned, likely due to drought or resource depletion. When European settlers arrived in the 1800s, the pueblo was already centuries into its collapse. Archaeological work began at Puerco Pueblo in the early 1900s, but systematic excavation didn't start until the 1930s under Depression-era federal work programs. Teams uncovered pottery, tools, and architectural details that helped establish timelines for Puebloan occupation in the region. The site was integrated into the National Monument System and opened to limited public access in 1962. A self-guided trail with interpretive signs was installed in 1974, allowing visitors to walk through the ruins and imagine the layout of the original village. Most of the walls are fragments now, eroded by wind and rain. But one interior wall, in what archaeologists identified as a storage room, remained partially intact, standing roughly 6 feet high. It was made of stacked sandstone blocks, chinked with clay mortar, and showed signs of having once supported roof beams. The wall faces southwest, away from the prevailing wind, which likely contributed to its preservation. In the summer of 1989, a team from the University of Arizona returned to Puerco Pueblo to conduct a detailed architectural survey. The project, led by Dr. Lilian Pacheco, aimed to create three-dimensional models of the site using photogrammetry and laser measurements. The team spent 6 weeks documenting every standing wall, foundation line, and structural remnant. They worked in shifts to capture the site at different times of day, recording how light and shadow reveal details invisible under direct sun. On July 19th, a team member named Daniel Rios was photographing the storage room wall during late afternoon. He set up a tripod to take a series of timed exposures. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the ruins. Rios reviewed the images that evening on a laptop in the field station. One photograph, time-stamped at 3:47 p.m., showed something he hadn't noticed while standing there: a shadow on the wall. Not from any visible object, but a clean rectangular outline, approximately 3 feet wide and 6 feet tall, positioned where a doorway might have been. Rios returned to the wall the next afternoon at the same time. The shadow was there again. He checked for obstructions, tools, equipment, vegetation. There was nothing between the sun and the wall that could cast that shape. He called over Dr. Pacheco. She saw it too. They documented it carefully. The shadow appeared at 3:47 p.m., remained visible for approximately 11 minutes, then faded as the sun's angle changed. The edges were sharp, the shape consistent. It looked exactly like the negative space of a doorway, rectangular, slightly taller than it was wide, centered on the wall about 2 feet above ground level. Dr. Pacheco checked the survey maps. There was no doorway in that wall, no opening of any kind. The wall was solid, continuous from its base to its eroded top edge. She examined the stonework closely. No gaps, no filled-in spaces, no signs of repair or alteration. The blocks were intact and original. Over the next week, the team observed the shadow daily. It appeared every afternoon at 3:47 p.m., always in the same position, always with the same dimensions. They tested for reflections from nearby surfaces, used solar path software to calculate sun angles, and checked for any structural features that might cast such a specific shadow. Nothing explained it. A graduate student on the team, a woman named Monica Salazar, suggested checking the site's original excavation records. The records were stored in the park's research library, a small building near the visitor center. Dr. Pacheco spent 2 days reviewing boxes of documents, field notes, and photographs from the 1930 surveys. She found something in a folder labeled Unfinished Structures. It was a hand-drawn architectural plan dated September 1936, showing proposed reconstructions of several rooms at Puerco Pueblo. One sketch depicted the storage room wall with a doorway marked in pencil, 3 feet wide, 6 feet tall, positioned exactly where the shadow appeared. A note in the margin read, "Doorway abandoned. No archaeological evidence for opening." The plan had been prepared by a Works Progress Administration supervisor named Eugene Hartwell, who oversaw the excavation crew. According to the notes, Hartwell believed a doorway should have existed in that wall based on the room's layout and traffic patterns. He proposed adding one during reconstruction, but when archaeologists reviewed the existing stonework, they found no indication a doorway had ever been there. The proposal was rejected. The wall was left as found. Dr. Pacheco made copies of the documents and compared them to the photographs Rios had taken. The dimensions matched exactly. The position matched. The shadow outlined a doorway that had been planned but never built, in a wall that had never contained an opening. The team expanded their observations. They documented the shadow from August through October of 1989. It appeared consistently, always at 3:47 p.m., only during months when the sun's angle was within a specific range. In November, as the sun's path shifted with the changing season, the shadow stopped appearing. Dr. Pacheco returned in March of 1990. The shadow reappeared on March 15th, the first day the sun reached the necessary angle. She submitted a preliminary report to the Park Service in April. The report described the phenomenon in factual terms, included photographs and solar calculations, and noted the correlation with Hartwell's abandoned architectural plan. She did not offer an explanation. A Park Service archaeologist named Dr. Victor Ruiz reviewed the report and visited the site in May of 1990. He observed the shadow, confirmed its dimensions, and examined the wall. He found the same lack of explanation. He wrote a brief memo recommending further study, but noted that the phenomenon, while unusual, does not appear to threaten the structural integrity of the ruins or pose safety concerns for visitors. No further study was authorized. The Park Service filed the report in its archive. Dr. Pacheco attempted to publish her findings in an archaeological journal in 1991. The paper was rejected. Reviewers said the phenomenon was insufficiently documented and suggested possible explanations involving reflected light or photographic artifacts, despite the team's efforts to rule those out. Monica Salazar, who had helped discover Hartwell's plans, wrote her master's thesis on anomalies in archaeological sites in 1992. She included a chapter on the Puerco Pueblo shadow. Her thesis was accepted, but her advisor suggested removing the chapter before publication. Salazar complied. The chapter was never published. In 2004, a photographer named James Whitmore visited Puerco Pueblo to document southwestern ruins for a book. He arrived in late afternoon and set up his camera near the storage room wall. He later said he saw the shadow but assumed it was cast by a piece of equipment or a nearby structure. He didn't think about it again until he reviewed his photographs weeks later. By then, he couldn't remember the exact date or time. He didn't follow up. Dr. Pacheco retired from the University of Arizona in 2009. In an interview conducted in 2011, she was asked if she still thought about the shadow. "Every March," she said. "I know it's there. I know when it appears. I've stopped trying to explain it." She was asked what disturbed her most about the phenomenon. She thought for a long moment before answering. "It's not that the shadow exists," she said. "It's that it matches something that was imagined but never built. Like the wall remembers a version of itself, that never happened. The shadow still appears at Puerco Pueblo. Every year, from March through October at 3:47 p.m., it outlines a doorway on a wall that has always been solid. Visitors walk past the ruins daily. Most never notice. Those who do assume it's a trick of the light. The wall stands where it has stood for 800 years, holding a shape that was drawn on paper in 1936, planned for a structure that never existed. The sun moves, the shadow falls, the doorway remains absent. Navigation fails in places where the earth forgets which way is north. Crystal Forest is one of the most visited areas of the Petrified Forest, named for the concentrations of crystallized quartz that make certain petrified logs shimmer in direct sunlight. The turnout is located along the main park road, a paved pull-off with space for roughly a dozen vehicles. A short trail leads from the parking area into a field of scattered logs, some as long as 20 feet, lying across beige and rust-colored soil. The terrain is flat and exposed, with visibility extending for miles in most directions. There are no trees, no water sources, and minimal vegetation, mostly low grasses and desert shrubs that cluster in shallow depressions. The area has been accessible to visitors since the 1930s, though the parking area wasn't paved until 1958. Before that, people simply pulled off the dirt road wherever they wanted to stop. Park rangers began regular patrols of the turnout in the early 1960s after vandalism and theft of petrified wood became ongoing problems. The patrols were routine, checking for broken fencing, monitoring visitor activity, and ensuring no one removed protected materials from the site. In the spring of 1973, a maintenance worker named Gerald Hoskins was conducting a fence repair near the turnout. He carried a compass as part of his standard equipment, used primarily for marking bearing lines when installing new posts or measuring property boundaries. Hoskins was experienced, a former Army engineer who had worked for the Park Service since 1968. He knew how to read a compass and trusted the tool implicitly. While walking the fence line approximately 50 yards from the parking area, he noticed his compass needle spinning, not drifting or oscillating, spinning continuously in a counterclockwise direction, completing full rotations every 2 to 3 seconds. He stopped walking. The needle continued spinning. He tapped the compass casing, assuming the mechanism had jammed. The needle kept moving. Hoskins walked 10 feet to his left. The needle stabilized immediately, pointing north as expected. He returned to his original position. The needle began spinning again. He marked the spot with a small cairn of stones and continued his work. When he returned to the maintenance yard that afternoon, he mentioned the incident to his supervisor, a man named Raymond Keller. Keller was skeptical but noted it in the daily log. 2 days later, Keller visited the site with his own compass. He found Hoskins' cairn and stood next to it. His compass needle spun counterclockwise, just as Hoskins had described. Keller walked in expanding circles around the cairn, testing at intervals. The spinning occurred within a roughly circular area, approximately 40 feet in diameter. Outside that boundary, the compass functioned normally. Keller filed a report with the park superintendent. Within a week, a ranger named Dolores Armijo was assigned to investigate. Armijo brought surveying equipment and spent an afternoon mapping the affected area. She confirmed the phenomenon, documenting the boundary with stakes placed at 10-foot intervals. She also noted that the spinning effect was consistent regardless of compass type. She tested 3 different models, including a military-grade lensatic compass. All behaved identically within the zone. The Park Service contacted the U.S. Geological Survey in June of 1973. A 2-person team arrived in August with magnetometers and ground-penetrating radar. They spent 3 days conducting surveys of the affected area and surrounding terrain. Their report, completed in September, found no magnetic anomalies, no subsurface metal deposits, and no geological features that would explain compass deviation. The soil composition was consistent with the rest of the park: sandstone, clay, and silica. Background magnetic readings were normal. The lead surveyor, a geophysicist named Dr. Marcus Holloway, included a note in his report stating, "The compass behavior is reproducible and measurable, but we can identify no physical cause. The effect appears localized and stable, but its origin remains undetermined." Rangers continued to monitor the site throughout 1974 and 1975. The phenomenon remained consistent. Visitors occasionally noticed it if they happened to be using compasses, though most did not. The Park Service posted no signs or warnings. The site was not considered dangerous, just unusual. In April of 1976, Armijo returned to check the stakes she had placed 3 years earlier. She brought a compass and walked to the center of the marked zone. The needle pointed north. She tested multiple positions within the staked boundary. Every compass reading was normal. The spinning had stopped. Armijo expanded her search, walking in widening circles from the original site. Roughly 200 yards to the northeast, near a cluster of smaller petrified logs, she found it again. The compass needle spun counterclockwise within a defined area. She measured the new zone, approximately 40 feet in diameter, identical to the original. She reported the finding immediately. Park Service officials were uncertain how to proceed. The phenomenon had moved, an outcome no one had anticipated. Geological features don't relocate. Magnetic anomalies remain fixed to their source. The new location showed no obvious connection to the old one. The terrain was similar but not identical. There were no fault lines, no subsurface structures that might explain a shift. Dr. Holloway was contacted again. He returned to the park in June of 1976 with updated equipment. He surveyed both the original site and the new location. Neither showed magnetic irregularities. He tested soil samples from both areas. The composition was unremarkable. He submitted a second report in August, this time noting that the phenomenon's apparent mobility suggests a mechanism inconsistent with known geophysical processes. The Park Service staked the new location and continued monitoring. The compass deviation persisted through 1977 and 1978. Rangers documented it in routine reports. No explanation emerged. In March of 1979, a ranger named Benjamin Vega checked the site during a scheduled patrol. The compasses worked normally. Vega tested the area thoroughly, walking grid patterns within and around the staked zone. No deviation occurred. He visited the original site from 1973, also normal. Over the following weeks, rangers tested both locations repeatedly. The phenomenon had vanished entirely. The Park Service removed the stakes later that year. No formal closure report was filed. The incident was archived with a note stating, "Resolved, cause unknown," but reports continued sporadically. In 1982, a visitor wrote to the park superintendent describing directional confusion near the Crystal Forest turnout. The visitor, an experienced hiker named Laura Mendez, said she had felt disoriented while walking the trail, unsure which direction led back to the parking area despite clear visibility and familiar landmarks. She eventually found her way, but said the experience was profoundly unsettling. Similar reports appeared in 1985, 1991, and 2003. None mentioned spinning compasses specifically, but all described a sense of lost direction in the same general area. Park rangers investigated each report but found nothing unusual. Compasses functioned normally. Trails were clearly marked. No physical hazards were identified. A retired ranger named Wallace Perry, who worked at the Petrified Forest from 1970 to 1996, was interviewed in 2008. He remembered the compass incidents clearly. "We never figured it out," he said. "It was there, then it wasn't, then it was somewhere else, then it was gone. That's not how the world works. Magnetic north doesn't move around a park at random." He paused before adding, "But people still get lost out there sometimes. Not physically lost. They can see where they're going. They just don't know which way they're facing. Even with landmarks, even with the sun. I've seen it happen twice, both times near Crystal Forest." The turnout remains a popular stop. Thousands of visitors park there every year, walk the trail, and photograph the petrified logs. The Park Service maintains the area regularly. Fencing is repaired. Signs are updated. Patrols continue. No stakes mark the locations where compasses once spun. The cairn Gerald Hoskins built in 1973 is long gone, scattered by wind or removed by maintenance crews. The ground looks like any other section of the park, flat, dry, unremarkable. But sometimes, visitors stand in the parking area and realize they're not certain which way they drove in. They look at their vehicles, at the road, at the mountains in the distance. Everything is visible. Everything is clear. They just can't remember which direction is which. Some absences are documented before anyone notices what's missing. Long Logs Trail runs through the southern section of the Petrified Forest, a half-mile loop that passes some of the largest concentrations of petrified wood in the park. The logs here are exceptionally long, many exceeding 20 feet, some approaching 40, lying where they fell more than 200 million years ago, when this was a river delta thick with conifer forests. The wood has been replaced entirely by silica, transformed into stone through a process so gradual that even the cellular structure remains visible under magnification. The logs are heavy, dense, and effectively permanent. Moving one requires machinery. The trail was established in 1934, though it remained unpaved until 1958. Park Service policy required periodic inventories of significant specimens to monitor theft and natural degradation. Petrified wood, despite federal protection, has always been stolen. Small pieces fit in pockets. Larger specimens require tools and planning, but theft still occurs. The Park Service needed documentation to track what was there and notice when something disappeared. In the summer of 1963, a team from the University of New Mexico conducted the most comprehensive inventory the trail had ever received. The project was led by Dr. Philip Donovan, a paleobotanist who specialized in Triassic flora. His team included 2 graduate students and a professional photographer named Morris Kellerman. Their task was simple: document every petrified log longer than 5 feet, photograph it from multiple angles, assign it a reference number, and record its GPS coordinates using surveying equipment. The work took 6 weeks. They documented 348 logs. Each was photographed with a measuring rod in frame for scale, numbered with a small chalk mark that would wash away with the first rain, and recorded in a leather-bound ledger that Donovan kept in a waterproof case. Kellerman used a Graflex Speed Graphic camera, a large-format press camera common in scientific documentation at the time. The film was 4 by 5-inch sheet film, capable of capturing exceptional detail. The photographs were developed in Albuquerque and stored in the university's geological archives. The ledger was filed with the Park Service. The inventory was considered complete and thorough. No follow-up was scheduled. In 1971, the Park Service initiated a new inventory as part of a broader resource management program. Technology had advanced. Better cameras, better surveying equipment, and updated documentation standards meant older inventories needed revision. A team of 3 rangers was assigned to repeat the Long Log survey. They carried copies of Donovan's photographs and ledger entries to verify continuity. The lead ranger was a woman named Rita Salazar, who had worked in the park since 1966. She was methodical and experienced, familiar with the trail and the protocols. The team began work in late April, moving systematically along the trail, matching each photograph to its corresponding log. Most of the logs were exactly where they had been 8 years earlier. Some had shifted slightly due to erosion or freeze-thaw cycles, but the changes were minimal and expected. The team worked through the inventory number by number, checking off each specimen as they confirmed its presence. On May 6th, they reached photograph number 219. The image showed a petrified log lying across a gentle slope, roughly 16 feet long and 2 feet in diameter at its widest point. The log had distinctive banding, layers of red and cream-colored quartz that gave it a striped appearance. The measuring rod in the photograph indicated its dimensions clearly. The background showed surrounding terrain that was easy to recognize: a cluster of smaller logs to the left, a low ridge of exposed sandstone to the right. Salazar found the location. The surrounding terrain matched the photograph exactly. The cluster of smaller logs was still there. The sandstone ridge was unchanged, but the 16-foot log was gone. The ground where it had been was undisturbed. No drag marks, no depressions, no tire tracks. The soil was compacted and weathered, showing no signs of recent activity. Salazar examined the area carefully. Petrified wood of that size would weigh several tons. Moving it would require a truck, a crane, or, at minimum, a team of workers with heavy equipment. There was no evidence of any of that. She checked the photograph again. The banding pattern was distinctive. She walked the surrounding area, thinking perhaps the log had been misidentified or the photograph mislabeled. She found no log matching that description anywhere along the trail. She radioed her supervisor, a man named Dennis Kovac. He arrived within an hour. Kovac reviewed the photograph and the site. He reached the same conclusion Salazar had. The log was gone, and there was no explanation for how it had been removed. He photographed the empty ground using the same angle Kellerman had used in 1963, positioning the camera as closely as possible to the original vantage point. The comparison was stark. The log was simply absent, replaced by undisturbed earth. The team completed the rest of the inventory over the following 2 weeks. Every other log was accounted for. Photograph 219 was the only discrepancy. Kovac filed a report with the park superintendent in June, including both the original photograph and the new images showing the empty site. The report noted the absence, but offered no theory. The Park Service opened an investigation. Rangers reviewed patrol logs from the previous 8 years, looking for reports of suspicious activity or unauthorized vehicles near the Long Logs Trail. They found nothing. No theft reports. No vandalism complaints. The trail had been quiet and routine. In August of 1971, a Park Service law enforcement officer named Gerald Hines interviewed Morris Kellerman, the photographer from the original 1963 survey. Kellerman was retired and living in Santa Fe. He remembered the project clearly and confirmed that all his photographs had been properly labeled and filed. Hines showed him photograph 219. Kellerman studied it for several minutes. "That's my work," Kellerman said, according to Hines's written report. "I remember that log. It took me 20 minutes to get the angle right because of the slope. The light was difficult." Hines asked if Kellerman was certain the photograph matched the assigned number. Kellerman checked his original field notes, which he still kept in a filing cabinet. The notes confirmed it. Log 219. 16 feet. Distinctive banding. Photographed on June 11, 1963. Hines later said that Kellerman seemed unsettled by the log's disappearance. He kept looking at the photograph. Hines recalled in a 1987 interview, "He said something I didn't put in the report. He said the exposure on that particular negative had always bothered him. He developed it himself, and there was something wrong with the light values, too much contrast in areas that should have been even. He said it was like the film recorded something differently than what he saw through the viewfinder. The photograph was sent to a forensic imaging lab in 1972 to check for tampering or mislabeling. The lab confirmed it was authentic, original film, developed in period-correct chemistry, no signs of alteration. But the lab also noted anomalies in the exposure pattern. Certain areas of the image showed light values inconsistent with the sun angle recorded in Kellerman's field notes. The anomalies were subtle, noticeable only under analysis, and the lab could not explain them. Dr. Donovan, who had led the original survey, was contacted in 1973. He was teaching at the University of Colorado by then. He reviewed the case and visited the site in September of that year. He examined the empty ground, compared it to his original ledger entries, and confirmed that the log had been there in 1963. "I touched that log," Donovan said in a letter to the Park Service written in October. "I measured it. I took core samples for mineral analysis. It was real, it was heavy, and it's not the kind of object that disappears without significant effort. I have no explanation." The investigation was quietly closed in 1974. The official conclusion stated that the log had likely been stolen by an unknown party using equipment that left no traces, possibly during a period of low visitation or at night. No suspects were identified. No charges were filed. Rita Salazar continued working at the Petrified Forest until her retirement in 1998. In an interview conducted in 2002, she was asked if she believed the theft explanation. She shook her head. "I've seen theft scenes," she said. "I've documented what happens when people remove protected materials. There are always traces, always. Disturbed soil, tool marks, fragments. This was different. It was like the log had never been there, except we had proof it had." The photograph remains in the Park Service archives. It shows a 16-foot log with distinctive red and cream banding lying on a slope surrounded by terrain that still exists unchanged. The empty ground where it lay can still be found along the Long Logs Trail, identifiable by the surrounding features visible in the image. Visitors walk past that spot daily. Most don't know anything was ever there. The trail guide mentions nothing about it. No marker indicates the location, but the photograph exists. Number 219, properly labeled, properly filed, a log that weighed several tons, documented and measured and real. And the ground where it was shows no memory of its presence, no depression, no outline, no trace of weight or mass ever resting there. Just soil, just space, just light that falls differently in the photograph than it should. Time moves forward except in places where people forget its passing. The Painted Desert occupies the northern expanse of the Petrified Forest, a vast badlands of exposed clay and siltstone that shifts through shades of red, purple, and gray, depending on the angle of sunlight. The landscape is ancient. Sedimentary layers deposited during the late Triassic period eroded into rounded hills and shallow valleys that stretch for miles without interruption. There are no trees, little vegetation, and almost no wildlife. The terrain absorbs sound. Conversations feel muted even in open air. Wind crosses the desert constantly but rarely carries noise with it. Several viewpoints line the rim road that follows the edge of the Painted Desert. These are pullouts with parking spaces and low stone walls built in the 1930s by the Civilian Conservation Corps. The viewpoints offer panoramic views across the Badlands, popular with photographers and tourists who stop briefly before continuing to other sections of the park. Visitors typically spend 10 to 15 minutes at each overlook. Most take photographs, read the informational plaques, and return to their vehicles. The area has been accessible since the park's establishment in 1906, though visitation remained low until the construction of paved roads in the 1940s. Rangers began regular patrols of the Rim Road in 1952, primarily to assist stranded motorists and monitor for heat-related emergencies during summer months. On August 7, 1955, a ranger named Thomas Beckett found a woman sitting on the stone wall at Kachina Point, one of the midsection viewpoints. She was alone, facing the desert, unmoving. Her car was parked nearby, engine off, driver's door open. Beckett approached and spoke to her. She didn't respond. He touched her shoulder. She blinked and turned toward him, appearing surprised to see him there. Her name was Helen Garrett. She was 34 years old, traveling alone from Illinois to California. She told Beckett she had stopped to look at the view. She remembered parking her car and walking to the wall. She remembered sitting down. Then Beckett was there, touching her shoulder. Beckett asked how long she had been sitting. Garrett said a few minutes, 5 at most. Beckett checked his watch. He had passed Kachina Point 43 minutes earlier during his patrol route. The car had not been there. He had noted its absence in his log because he made a practice of recording all vehicles at viewpoints. Garrett checked her own watch. She stared at it for a long moment. 41 minutes had passed since she had last looked at the time. She insisted that wasn't possible. She remembered sitting down. She remembered looking at the clouds. Nothing else. Beckett asked if she felt unwell. She said no. He asked if she had been drinking or taking medication. She said no. She appeared coherent, calm, and visibly confused. Beckett noted the incident in his patrol log, but did not file a formal report. He assumed she had dozed off and lost track of time. A similar incident occurred on June 14, 1956. A ranger named Luis Farias found a man sitting motionless at Tawa Point, another viewpoint approximately 2 miles east of Kachina Point. The man, whose name was recorded as Bernard Kowalski, was found in the same condition, sitting, facing the desert, unresponsive until directly touched. When Farias made contact, Kowalski reacted with immediate confusion. He had stopped to take photographs. He remembered setting up his tripod. Then the ranger was there. 32 minutes had passed. Kowalski had no memory of them. His camera, still mounted on the tripod, had not been used. The shutter count was the same as when he had last checked it. Farias filed a report this time. She included details about Kowalski's condition: alert, oriented, no signs of intoxication or medical distress. She noted that his description of the experience matched one she had heard from another ranger, though she didn't specify who or when. Between 1956 and 1959, 11 more cases were documented. All occurred at painted desert viewpoints. All involved visitors found sitting motionless, facing the Badlands, unresponsive until physically touched. Time intervals ranged from 20 minutes to 45 minutes. None of the subjects remembered anything during the missing time, except, in several cases, a vague sense of watching the sky. The Park Service began tracking the incidents in 1957 after the 4th case was reported. A medical consultant, Dr. Raymond Guzman, was brought in to review the available information. Guzman interviewed 3 of the affected individuals who were willing to return to the park for follow-up. All 3 submitted to physical examinations and basic neurological tests. All were healthy. None showed signs of seizure activity, drug use, or psychological distress. Guzman noted one consistent finding. Blood samples taken from all 3 subjects showed elevated melatonin levels, significantly higher than normal for daytime hours. Melatonin is a hormone that regulates sleep-wake cycles, typically rising in darkness and falling in daylight. The elevated levels made no sense given the time of day and the subject's wakefulness. They weren't asleep, Guzman wrote in his report submitted in October of 1957. They were awake and aware, but experiencing a state I cannot categorize. The melatonin findings suggest a disruption in circadian signaling, but I have no explanation for why this would occur selectively at specific geographic locations during daylight hours. One of the subjects, a school teacher named Margaret Lindholm, described the experience in detail during her interview. "I was looking at the clouds," she said. "They were moving across the sky, but then they stopped. Not like they slowed down, they just stopped, completely still. I kept watching because it seemed impossible. I don't remember anything after that until the ranger touched my arm." Lindholm's account was consistent with statements from two other subjects who mentioned clouds. Another subject, an engineer named Paul DeSoto, said the light felt wrong while he sat at the viewpoint. "It was bright, but it didn't seem to be coming from the sun," he said. "It was just there, everywhere at once." The Park Service installed monitoring equipment at 3 viewpoints in 1958, motion-activated cameras and time-stamped logs to document visitor activity. The equipment functioned for 6 months. During that time, 2 more incidents occurred, both captured on film. The footage showed individuals arriving at viewpoints, exiting their vehicles, and sitting on the stone walls. The cameras recorded them sitting motionless for extended periods, one for 27 minutes, another for 38 minutes. Both subjects appeared awake. Their eyes were open. Neither moved during the entire interval. When rangers arrived and made physical contact, both subjects reacted with visible confusion, checking their watches immediately. The footage was reviewed by Dr. Guzman and a neurologist from the University of Arizona, Dr. Sylvia Okafor. Okafor noted that the subjects displayed no signs of catatonia or absence seizures. "They appear conscious," she wrote in her analysis. "Their posture is stable. Their eyes are tracking. There's no indication of neurological impairment, but they don't respond to external stimuli until touched." The Park Service removed the cameras in 1959 after budget constraints made continued monitoring impractical. By that time, 13 cases had been documented. All occurred between March and October, during months with high visitation. None occurred in winter. Rangers were instructed to watch for motionless visitors at viewpoints and check on them if they remained stationary for more than 15 minutes. The incident stopped after 1959. Rangers continued patrols, but no additional cases were reported. In 1963, a Park Service memo noted that the phenomenon had resolved without explanation and recommended closing the investigation. But the medical records remained filed in park archives. 13 individuals, all experiencing the same symptoms, all showing elevated melatonin during daylight hours. Dr. Guzman's report included a note that was later referenced in a 1972 review of unusual park incidents. "The consistency of the accounts is striking," Guzman wrote. "These were not isolated psychiatric episodes or random neurological events. Something specific occurred at those locations during that time period. I cannot identify what it was, but the pattern is undeniable." Helen Garrett, the first documented case, was contacted again in 1968 by a journalist researching unexplained phenomena in national parks. She remembered the incident clearly. "I've thought about it for years," she said. "I wasn't asleep. I wasn't unconscious. I was just somewhere else for a while. Not physically somewhere else. I was still sitting there. But I wasn't experiencing time the way I should have been." She paused before adding, "The strangest part was the clouds. I know they were moving before I sat down. I remember thinking they looked like they were racing across the sky because the wind was so strong. But when I watched them, they just hung there, frozen. And I kept watching because I couldn't understand why they weren't moving." The Painted Desert viewpoints remain accessible. Thousands of visitors stop there every year. Rangers still patrol the rim road. No similar incidents have been reported since 1959, though the Park Service continues to maintain records of unusual visitor behavior. The stone walls where the 13 individuals sat are unchanged. The view across the Badlands is the same, layered hills of red and purple clay stretching to the horizon under open sky. Clouds still move across that sky, driven by wind that never stops, most of the time. Instruments measure what should be impossible, and sometimes they do it more than once. The teepees are a distinctive geological formation in the Petrified Forest, a cluster of conical hills composed of bluish-gray bentonite clay. The name comes from their resemblance to traditional Plains Indian dwellings, though the comparison is superficial. The hills are soft, rounded, and prone to erosion. They sit in a shallow basin surrounded by badlands, accessible via a short spur road off the main park route. The area is quiet and isolated. Few visitors stop there for more than a few minutes. The ground is unstable, the terrain unremarkable except for the unusual color of the clay. The formation has been part of the park since its expansion in 1932. Early geologists noted the teepees for their mineral composition, bentonite forms from volcanic ash that has weathered over millions of years. The clay absorbs water and swells, then contracts as it dries, creating a landscape that shifts subtly with each rain. There is no vegetation. The soil is too alkaline. Nothing grows except sparse desert grasses along the basin's edges. In the early 1980s, the National Weather Service, in cooperation with the Park Service, established a network of automated weather stations across remote areas of the Southwest. The goal was to collect high-resolution atmospheric data in locations where staffed facilities were impractical. The stations were small, solar-powered sensor arrays mounted on aluminum poles connected to data loggers that transmitted readings via radio to a central collection point. One such station was installed near the teepees in March of 1984. The site was selected for its isolation and topographic neutrality, flat enough for stable readings but elevated enough to avoid ground-level temperature inversions. A two-person crew from the Weather Service spent an afternoon setting up the equipment. The station recorded temperature, humidity, wind speed, wind direction, barometric pressure, and precipitation. Data was logged every 15 minutes and transmitted twice daily. The station operated without issue for 11 months. Readings were consistent with expected patterns for the region: cold winters, hot summers, low humidity, occasional high winds. The data was unremarkable until February 9, 1985. At 2:33 a.m., the barometric pressure sensor recorded a drop from 29.8 inches of mercury to 0.1 inches of mercury. The reading lasted exactly 4 seconds before returning to 29.8. The other sensors showed no anomalies. Temperature, humidity, and wind readings remained stable throughout the event. A technician named Samuel Ortega reviewed the data during a routine quality check in March. He flagged the reading as a sensor error and submitted a maintenance request. Equipment malfunctions were common in remote stations. Dust, extreme. Temperatures and electrical surges could all produce false readings. Ortega assumed the pressure sensor had glitched. A replacement sensor was installed in April of 1985. The original sensor was returned to the manufacturer for analysis. The manufacturer, a company called Weathertronics based in Texas, tested the sensor and found it functioning correctly. They noted no defects or calibration errors. The sensor was returned to service at a different location in New Mexico, where it performed without issue for 3 years. On February 17, 1986, the teepees station recorded another identical event. At 2:33 a.m., the pressure dropped to near vacuum levels for 4 seconds, then returned to normal. All other sensors remained stable. Ortega reviewed the data again. This time, he filed a formal anomaly report. The Weather Service dispatched a field engineer, a woman named Dr. Veronica Huang, to inspect the station. Huang arrived in March and spent 2 days testing the equipment. She replaced the pressure sensor again, installed a backup sensor for redundancy, and checked all wiring and connections. Everything appeared functional. Huang also examined the surrounding terrain. Barometric pressure anomalies can occur due to localized weather phenomena, microbursts, dust devils, or rapid temperature changes. But such events would affect other sensors. Temperature and wind readings would show corresponding fluctuations. The TP's data showed none of that. The pressure drop was isolated and instantaneous. "I've never seen a pressure reading that low outside a laboratory vacuum chamber," Huang said in her field report dated March 23, 1986. If the reading is accurate, it would indicate a near total absence of atmosphere at ground level. That should be impossible under any natural conditions I'm aware of. On February 4, 1987, the station recorded the event again. 2:33 a.m. Pressure dropped to 0.1 inches of mercury for 4 seconds. Both the primary and backup sensors registered the same reading simultaneously. All other measurements remained normal. The Weather Service convened a review panel in March of 1987. The panel included atmospheric physicists, engineers, and a geologist familiar with the Petrified forest. They reviewed 3 years of data from the TP station and compared it to readings from other stations in the network. The TP's anomalies were unique. No other station had recorded similar events. The panel considered several explanations. Equipment error was the most obvious, but 3 different sensor systems had produced identical readings. Environmental factors were examined: seismic activity, electromagnetic interference, proximity to underground cavities. The geology of the TPs was reviewed. Bentonite clay is not associated with subsurface voids or gas emissions. There were no fault lines nearby, no caves, no mines. One panel member, Dr. Marcus Ridley, a physicist from Arizona State University, suggested that the readings might indicate a localized atmospheric anomaly, a brief extreme weather event too small and fast to affect surrounding sensors. But such an event would require physical mechanisms that weren't consistent with known meteorology. Ridley acknowledged this in his notes, but offered no alternative theory. The panel's report, completed in May of 1987, concluded that the readings were unexplained and potentially artifactual. The term artifactual implied the data was false, produced by equipment rather than genuine atmospheric conditions. The report recommended relocating the station to eliminate possible site-specific interference. The station was moved in June of 1987 to a location 3 miles west, near the park's southern boundary. It operated at the new site without incident. No pressure anomalies were recorded. The TP site was left empty, the mounting pole removed, the ground undisturbed. Samuel Ortega, who had monitored the station since its installation, later said the decision to reclassify the data bothered him. 3 different sensors gave us the same reading 7 times over 3 years, he said in an interview conducted in 2001. That's not equipment error. That's a pattern. But the panel said it was artifactual because they couldn't explain it. That's not science. That's avoidance. He was asked if he believed the pressure drops were real. "I don't know what they were," he said, "but the instruments measured something. And whatever it was, it happened at the same time, in the same place, every February." That's not random. Dr. Veronica Huang retired from the Weather Service in 1996. In an unpublished memoir she wrote years later, she included a brief section about the TP station. "I checked everything," she wrote. "I tested every component, reviewed every calibration. The sensors worked, the data was clean. But the readings described conditions that shouldn't exist at ground level on Earth. I couldn't reconcile that. Neither could anyone else, so we moved the station and stopped asking questions. The original data logs were archived with the National Weather Service and later transferred to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Access to the TP station records is restricted. A Freedom of Information Act request submitted in 2009 was partially fulfilled. Temperature and wind data were released, but barometric pressure readings were redacted. The reason given was data quality concerns. The teepee's formation remains accessible to visitors. The pullout is still marked on park maps. A short interpretive trail was added in 2004 with signs explaining the geology of bentonite clay. The trail sees minimal traffic. Most visitors drive past without stopping. The site where the weather station stood is unmarked. The ground shows no evidence of the installation, no concrete footings, no disturbed soil. The clay has eroded and reformed in the years since, smoothing over any trace of human presence. On clear nights, the teepees sit under open sky. Stars are visible for miles in every direction. The air is still. The silence is absolute. At 2:33 a.m. on February nights, the pressure at that site is what instruments say it should be: stable, normal, consistent with altitude and temperature. Unless it isn't. And if it isn't, there's no longer any equipment there to record it. Sound stops traveling when the air forgets how to carry it. Rainbow Forest occupies the southern end of the Petrified Forest, named for the multicolored bands of quartz, jasper, and amethyst visible in the petrified logs scattered across the area. The forest designation is historical. No living trees exist here now, only the mineralized remains of ancient conifers that fell more than 200 million years ago. The terrain is open and gently rolling, covered with sparse grasses and low shrubs that turn gold in autumn. Visibility extends for miles in most directions. The area is quiet naturally but not silent. Wind moves through constantly, carrying small sounds: grass rustling, insects, the distant calls of ravens. A visitor center and museum were built at Rainbow Forest in 1962, making it one of the park's primary access points. A network of trails radiates from the center, the most popular being the Giant Logs Trail, a paved half-mile loop through one of the largest concentrations of petrified wood in the park. The area sees heavy foot traffic during peak season, with families, school groups, and tour buses arriving daily. On the afternoon of October 14, 1972, approximately 20 visitors were scattered along the Giant Logs Trail and surrounding areas. The weather was clear, temperature in the low 60s, wind steady from the southwest at 8 to 10 miles per hour. Park Ranger Daniel Whitmore was conducting a routine patrol near the trail's eastern section, walking a service road that paralleled the main path. At approximately 3:17 p.m., Whitmore noticed something wrong. The wind had stopped, not diminished, stopped completely. He could see grass still bending in the distance beyond a certain point. But where he stood, the air was perfectly still. He took several more steps forward and realized he could no longer hear his own footsteps. His boots made contact with gravel, but no sound reached his ears. Whitmore stopped walking and spoke aloud. He heard nothing. He clapped his hands together. Silence. He could feel the impact, feel his palms meet, but the sound was absent. He turned and walked backward, retracing his steps. After roughly 20 feet, sound returned abruptly: the crunch of gravel, the wind, his own breathing. He radioed the visitor center. The radio produced static, but no voice transmission. He left the silent zone and tried again. This time, the radio worked. He reported what he had experienced to the duty ranger, a woman named Patricia Moreno. Moreno asked him to repeat himself. Whitmore did, speaking carefully and precisely. Moreno said she would investigate and asked him to remain in the area. Moreno arrived 12 minutes later with another ranger, Robert Yamaguchi. By then, 3 visitors had also encountered the phenomenon. A family of 4, parents Michael and Susan Brennan and their 2 children, ages 8 and 11, had been walking the trail when they entered the affected area. The parents later described the experience in written statements. "We were talking," Susan Brennan wrote. "The kids were ahead of us, and Michael was pointing out one of the larger logs. Then everything went quiet. Not peaceful quiet, wrong quiet. Michael was still talking, but I couldn't hear him. I could see his mouth moving. The kids turned around and their mouths were moving too, but there was nothing. No sound at all." Michael Brennan's statement corroborated his wife's account. "I kept talking because I didn't realize at first that no sound was coming out. Susan grabbed my arm, and I looked at her and realized something was very wrong. We backed up and suddenly we could hear again. It was like crossing a line. 1 step, silence. 1 step back, sound." 2 other visitors, a retired couple from Colorado named Harold and Jean Kimball, encountered the zone from a different direction. They described the boundary as distinct and circular, approximately 60 feet in diameter. "You could stand at the edge and put your hand in," Harold Kimball said in an interview conducted the following day. "If your hand was inside the circle, you could snap your fingers and hear nothing. Pull your hand back out, and the snap was audible." Moreno, Whitmore, and Yamaguchi tested the phenomenon extensively. They threw rocks into the zone. The impacts produced no sound. They shouted from outside the boundary, no echo, no audible reflection. They used a portable radio transmitting from inside the zone and receiving outside it. No transmission was received. When the radio was moved outside the boundary, transmission resumed immediately. The phenomenon persisted for 17 minutes. During that time, Moreno counted 9 people who experienced it, 3 rangers and 6 visitors. She attempted to photograph the zone, but the images showed nothing unusual, just normal terrain and scattered petrified logs. Yamaguchi marked the perimeter with small stones placed at intervals, noting that the boundary remained consistent throughout the event. At 3:34 p.m., sound returned. Whitmore was standing inside the zone at the time. He described the transition as instantaneous. "It was like someone turned the volume back on," he said. 1 second, nothing. The next second, wind, voices, everything at once. The rangers examined the ground inside the marked perimeter. The soil appeared undisturbed. The grass was intact. There were no visual differences between the affected area and the surrounding terrain. Moreno filed a detailed incident report that evening, including witness statements and a sketch map showing the location and dimensions of the zone. The Park Service dispatched an investigative team the following week. The team included an acoustics specialist from the University of Arizona, Dr. Leonard Prakash, and 2 environmental scientists. They spent 3 days at the site conducting audio tests, measuring soil composition, and checking for subsurface anomalies using ground-penetrating radar. Dr. Prakash found nothing that would explain the phenomenon. "Sound requires a medium to travel through," he wrote in his preliminary report dated October 23, 1972. "In atmosphere, that medium is air. For sound to cease completely within a defined area, the air itself would need to change properties, density, temperature, molecular composition. We measured all of these parameters. The air inside the marked zone was identical to the air outside it." The environmental scientists tested for gas emissions, electromagnetic interference, and geological features that might affect sound propagation. All results were normal. The site showed no unusual characteristics, but something had changed. By late October, visitors and rangers began noticing that the grass within the marked perimeter was turning brown. Not from drought, the area had received normal rainfall. Not from foot traffic, the zone was off the main trail and had seen minimal human contact. The grass simply died, forming a near-perfect circle 60 feet in diameter. Soil samples taken in November showed no contamination, no chemical residue, no bacterial or fungal pathogens. The grass had died, but the cause was not apparent. By December, the circle was bare. No living vegetation, just exposed soil and withered stems. The Park Service fenced off the area in January of 1973 to prevent visitors from disturbing the site. A second round of tests was conducted in February by a team from the U.S. Geological Survey. They found the same results. No explanation for the dead zone. The grass began regrowing in April of 1973. By June, the circle was no longer visible. Vegetation had returned to normal, showing no lasting effects. The fence was removed in July. The Park Service closed the investigation in August, filing the incident under unexplained environmental anomaly. Dr. Prakash attempted to publish his findings in an acoustics journal in 1974. The paper was rejected. Reviewers cited insufficient data and lack of reproducible results. Prakash did not pursue publication further. Patricia Moreno continued working at the Petrified Forest until her retirement in 2001. In an interview conducted in 2006, she was asked if she had experienced anything similar to the silent zone during her remaining years at the park. "Never," she said. "I walked that area hundreds of times after October of '72. It was always normal. But I remember what it felt like to stand in that circle. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the absence of something else, something I don't have a word for." She was asked what she believed caused the phenomenon. She shook her head. "I don't know. The scientists couldn't explain it. The grass died and then came back. We documented everything we could, but documentation doesn't give you answers. It just gives you proof that something happened." The site remains accessible to visitors. No markers indicate where the silent zone occurred. The giant logs trail passes within 50 yards of the location. Thousands of people walk past it every year, unaware of what happened there in October of 1972. The grass grows normally now. The wind carries sound across the landscape as it always has. Ravens call from distant perches. Footsteps on gravel can be heard clearly. But the witness statements remain filed in park archives. 9 people describing 17 minutes when the air stopped carrying sound, when voices moved mouths but reached no ears, when the world continued but made no noise. And for months afterward, the grass remembered. A perfect circle where nothing would grow, where the ground itself seemed changed by whatever had passed through. The circle is gone now. The grass covers it. But the silence for those 17 minutes was absolute. Distance is measured by instruments that sometimes disagree with the ground beneath them. Route 66 entered Arizona in 1926, though the highway wasn't fully paved across the state until the mid-1930s. The road passed through the Petrified Forest beginning in 1937, when the route was extended to connect Holbrook and Sanders. The alignment cut through the southern portion of the park, running roughly parallel to what is now the modern Park Road. For 21 years, Route 66 carried cross-country travelers through the desert badlands, past scattered petrified logs and painted clay hills. The road was narrow, 2 lanes with minimal shoulders, prone to washouts during summer storms. Traffic was heaviest during the post-war years, as Americans took to the highway in increasing numbers. Service stations and roadside attractions sprouted along the route. The Painted Desert Trading Post opened in 1946. Stewart's Petrified Wood became a popular stop for tourists collecting souvenirs, legal at the time. The road saw thousands of vehicles annually, families in sedans, long-haul truckers, travelers heading west in search of work or warmer climates. In 1958, Route 66 was realigned to bypass the park entirely. A new highway was constructed several miles to the north, straighter and wider, designed for higher speeds and modern traffic volumes. The old alignment through the Petrified Forest was abandoned, though sections of pavement remained visible for decades, cracking and fragmenting under the desert sun. Between 1948 and 1956, at least 14 motorists reported an unusual phenomenon while driving a specific section of Route 66 through the park. The reports were scattered and informal, mentioned in letters to the Highway Department, logbook entries at service stations, and one article in a Holbrook newspaper dated July of 1953. The phenomenon was consistent across accounts. Odometers advanced further than the measured distance of the road. The first documented report came from a truck driver named Ernest Calloway, who drove the route regularly hauling freight between Albuquerque and Los Angeles. In a letter dated March 19, 1948, addressed to the Arizona Highway Department, Calloway described an irregularity in his mileage logs. "I run the same route every week, and I keep precise records for fuel and maintenance purposes," Calloway wrote. "There is a stretch through the Petrified Forest, approximately half a mile long, where my odometer consistently records more mileage than the road actually covers. I have measured this section multiple times using my truck's trip odometer and comparing it to roadside mile markers. The markers indicate half a mile. My odometer shows 0.6 to 0.7 miles. This has occurred on at least 8 separate trips." The Highway Department responded with a form letter thanking Calloway for his correspondence and suggesting he have his vehicle serviced. There is no indication they investigated further. A similar report appeared in the Holbrook Tribune News in July of 1953. A local businessman named Walter Brennan told a reporter he had noticed his car's odometer jumping ahead when driving through the park. Brennan said he first noticed the discrepancy when calculating fuel efficiency and realized his mileage readings didn't match the distance shown on maps. "I thought my odometer was broken," Brennan said in the article, "but it works fine everywhere else. Just that one stretch of road, my mileage goes up faster than it should." The article treated the story as a curiosity, a minor oddity of local interest. It included no follow-up investigation and no additional witnesses. The phenomenon was mentioned briefly, then forgotten. In 1959, after the road had been abandoned, a survey crew from the Arizona Department of Transportation was assigned to document the old Route 66 alignment for archival purposes. The crew included a civil engineer named Donald Keller and 2 assistants. Their task was to measure and photograph the abandoned road, noting its condition and any features that might be relevant to future land use planning. Keller's crew worked through the Petrified Forest section in October of 1959. They used standard surveying equipment, measuring wheels, theodolites, and reference markers. When they measured the stretch of road Calloway and others had described, they found something unexpected. The physical distance, measured by wheel and verified with surveying instruments, matched the original construction plans, half a mile, 2,640 feet. But when Keller drove the section in the survey vehicle, the odometer advanced further. He repeated the drive 3 times. Each time, the odometer recorded between 0.6 and 0.7 miles, roughly 3,500 to 3,700 feet. Keller documented the discrepancy in his field notes dated October 12, 1959. He noted that the odometer functioned correctly on all other sections of road. He also observed that the pavement in the affected section had subtle curves, gentle deviations from a straight line that weren't shown on the original construction plans. The curves were barely noticeable while driving. They didn't require steering corrections or reduced speed, but they were measurable. Keller sketched the alignment in his notes, showing the road weaving slightly left and right in a pattern that added cumulative distance. He estimated the curves added approximately 200 feet to the total path traveled, though that still didn't fully account for the odometer readings. Keller's supervisor, a man named Raymond Pacheco, reviewed the field notes, and visited the site in November. Pacheco confirmed the measurements and the odometer discrepancy. He ordered core samples of the pavement to determine if the curves had been part of the original construction or if the road had shifted over time due to ground settling. The core samples were analyzed in December of 1959. The asphalt showed normal aging and weathering, but no signs of structural failure or lateral movement. The substrate beneath the pavement was stable, compacted sand and gravel undisturbed, but the lab report included an unexpected finding. The asphalt composition was consistent with materials and techniques used in the early 1930s, not 1937 when the road was supposedly built. Pacheco requested construction records from the Highway Department archives. The records showed that Route 66 was extended through the Petrified Forest in 1937, with paving completed in 1938. No construction was documented in the area prior to that, but the asphalt cores suggested otherwise. A materials analyst named Dr. Helena Vasquez reviewed the samples in January of 1960. She confirmed the initial findings. The binder composition and aggregate gradation are characteristic of practices from 1932 to 1934, she wrote in her report. This does not match the documented construction date for this section of Route 66. Pacheco filed a report with the State Highway Department in February of 1960. The report documented the odometer discrepancy, the undocumented curves in the pavement, and the inconsistency between construction records and material analysis. He recommended further investigation to determine if the original surveys had been inaccurate or if the road had been built in stages not reflected in official records. No further investigation was conducted. The Highway Department archived the report without comment. Pacheco was reassigned to a different project in March. Keller left the department later that year to take a position in California. In 1973, a historian named Laura Macklin researched the history of Route 66 in Arizona for a state preservation project. She discovered Pacheco's 1960 report in archived files. She attempted to locate the original construction records for the Petrified Forest section, but found inconsistencies. Some documents referenced preliminary surveys conducted in 1935. Others indicated construction began in 1937. No records mentioned work in 1932. Macklin interviewed several retired highway workers who had been employed during the 1930s. None remembered any road construction through the Petrified Forest before 1937. One former surveyor, a man named Victor Juarez, said he had worked on the Route 66 extension and remembered the terrain clearly. "We laid that road on virgin ground," he said in an interview conducted in 1974. "There was nothing there before we arrived. No old roads, no prior construction, just desert." Macklin included a footnote about the discrepancy in her research report but offered no explanation. The report was published by the Arizona Historical Society in 1975. It received minimal attention. The abandoned Route 66 pavement deteriorated over the following decades. Sections were removed or buried during park expansion projects. By 1990, little remained of the original road surface. The curves Keller had documented were no longer visible. The precise location of the half-mile section became difficult to identify without reference markers. In 2008, a GPS mapping project conducted by the National Park Service attempted to create a digital overlay of the historic Route 66 alignment through the Petrified Forest. The project used archival maps, aerial photographs, and remaining physical traces of the road. The team identified the general location of the section described in the 1959 survey. They drove the area using vehicles equipped with GPS and standard odometers. The GPS readings matched the physical distance. The odometers recorded normal mileage. No discrepancy was observed. Donald Keller, the engineer who had first documented the phenomenon, was still alive in 2008. He was contacted by a researcher working on the GPS project. Keller confirmed his 1959 findings. "I measured that road myself," he said, "multiple times. The odometer advanced faster than the actual distance. I documented it carefully because I knew people wouldn't believe it without proof." He was asked if he thought the pavement might have been altered after his survey. "The curves were real," he said. "They were in the pavement. Whoever laid that road didn't follow the plans, and the asphalt dated 5 years earlier than it should have. I don't know how to explain that. Neither did anyone else." The old Route 66 alignment is marked on historic maps. Visitors occasionally hike sections of the abandoned road looking for remnants of pavement and roadside artifacts. Most of the surface is gone now, reclaimed by desert and erosion, but the reports remain. 14 drivers, over 8 years, all describing the same phenomenon. An odometer that advanced too quickly, distance that stretched beyond measurement. A road that curved in patterns not shown in plans, paved with asphalt laid before the road officially existed. The pavement is gone. The curves are buried or eroded away, but the measurements are still on file. 5,920 feet by wheel and transit, 3,500 to 3,700 feet by odometer. The numbers don't match. They never did. And no one knows which measurement was wrong. Cameras record what the eye misses, except when they record what was never there. Lacey Point sits on the eastern rim of the Painted Desert, a viewpoint overlooking miles of exposed badlands that stretch toward the horizon in layers of red, purple, and gray. The overlook was developed in 1957 with a small parking area and low stone wall built by the Civilian Conservation Corps. The view is uninterrupted, no trees, no structures, nothing between the observer and the distant mesas except open desert. Visibility on clear days extends for 15 to 20 miles. The terrain is stark and empty, shaped by erosion into rounded hills and shallow washes that change color with the angle of sunlight. The point is named after William Lacey, a surveyor who mapped portions of the Painted Desert in 1894. His notes describe the location as offering a prospect of uncommon clarity, where the eye may trace the land's contours without obstruction for distances that humble estimation. The view remains as Lacey described it, clear, vast, and unbroken. On July 23, 1969, a family from Ohio visited Lacey Point during a cross-country road trip. The family consisted of Richard and Barbara Townsend and their 2 teenage children. They arrived at the viewpoint in mid-afternoon, parked, and walked to the stone wall to admire the desert. Richard Townsend carried a Pentax Spotmatic camera, a 35mm single-lens reflex model popular among amateur photographers at the time. Townsend took several photographs. He photographed his family at the wall, the parking area, and the desert landscape. One photograph was a panoramic attempt. Townsend stood at the wall and took 3 overlapping images, intending to create a wide view of the Badlands when the prints were developed. He used slide film, Kodachrome 64, known for its color accuracy and fine grain. The Townsends continued their trip, visiting Grand Canyon, Zion, and Bryce Canyon, before returning to Ohio in early August. Townsend sent the film to a processing lab in Cleveland. The slides were returned 2 weeks later in standard cardboard mounts. Townsend reviewed them using a handheld slide viewer. The panoramic sequence contained an object that Townsend didn't remember seeing. In the rightmost frame, near the horizon line, there appeared to be a rectangular structure. It was distant but distinct, a vertical shape rising from the desert floor, dark against the lighter-colored terrain. Townsend held the slide up to a lamp and examined it closely. The structure looked artificial. It had clean edges and a geometric form that didn't match the natural contours of the surrounding landscape. Townsend asked his wife if she remembered seeing anything like that. She did not. He asked his children. Neither of them recalled any structure on the horizon. Townsend set the slide aside, assuming it was a processing error or a flaw in the film. 3 months later, in November of 1969, Townsend attended a photography club meeting in Cleveland. He brought several slides to share, including the panoramic images from Lacey Point. When he projected the slide containing the structure, another club member, a man named Gerald Hoffman, who worked as an optical engineer, asked about the object on the horizon. Townsend explained that he didn't know what it was. Hoffman asked to borrow the slide for examination. Townsend agreed. Hoffman took the slide to his workplace, a company that manufactured precision lenses, and examined it under magnification. He found no evidence of damage, double exposure, or contamination. The image appeared to be a genuine recording of something present in the landscape at the time the photograph was taken. Hoffman returned the slide in December and suggested Townsend contact the Park Service. Hoffman had calculated the approximate size and distance of the structure using the photograph's perspective and known landmarks. Based on his analysis, the object appeared to be roughly 40 feet tall and located approximately 2 miles from the viewpoint. Townsend wrote to the Petrified Forest National Park in January of 1970. He included a copy of the slide and a letter explaining when and where the photograph was taken. He asked if the Park Service could identify the structure. The letter was forwarded to the park's chief ranger, a man named Douglas Erickson. Erickson reviewed the slide and consulted topographic maps of the area. There was no structure at the indicated location. The terrain 2 miles from Lacey Point was open badlands, no buildings, no towers, no installations of any kind. Erickson checked with park maintenance staff to confirm no temporary structures had been erected in that area during summer of 1969. None had been. Erickson responded to Townsend in February, thanking him for the inquiry and stating that the Park Service had no record of any structure matching the description. Erickson suggested the object might be a distant mesa or rock formation that appeared artificial due to atmospheric conditions or the angle of the photograph. Townsend was unsatisfied with that explanation. He had studied the slide carefully. The object didn't look like a natural formation. It was too regular, too geometric. In March of 1970, he sent the slide to a photographic analysis laboratory in New York that specialized in forensic image examination. The lab was operated by a company called Image Tech Associates. The lab's report, completed in April, confirmed Hoffman's initial assessment. The slide showed no signs of tampering, double exposure, or processing defects. The structure in the image appeared to be a genuine element of the scene captured by the camera. The lab noted that the object's edges were sharp and its form was consistent with a solid vertical structure rather than a mirage or atmospheric distortion. The report also included an analysis of perspective lines and scale. Using the known distance to visible landmarks in the photograph, the lab estimated the structure was between 35 and 45 feet tall and located approximately 1.8 to 2.2 miles from the camera position. The report concluded with a statement. The object recorded in this image does not appear to be an artifact of the photographic process. It represents a physical feature present in the landscape at the time of exposure. Townsend sent copies of the lab report to the Park Service in May of 1970. Erickson reviewed the new information and forwarded it to the regional office in Santa Fe. In June, a Park Service investigator named Lorraine Vega was assigned to examine the matter. Vega visited Lacey Point in July of 1970, exactly 1 year after the Townsend's visit. She brought the slide, the lab report, and surveying equipment. She positioned herself at the approximate location where Townsend had stood and used a theodolite to measure angles and distances to landmarks visible in the photograph. She confirmed the perspective matched. She then sighted toward the location where the structure would have been. The area was empty, no structure, no foundation, no remnants of construction. Vega hiked to the site, a 2-mile walk across loose clay and eroded gullies. The terrain showed no signs of human activity, no concrete footings, no disturbed soil, no trash or debris. The ground was weathered and undisturbed, consistent with decades or centuries of natural erosion. Vega photographed the location from multiple angles. She compared her photographs to Townsend's slide. The landscape features matched: distant mesas, erosional patterns, the horizon line. But where Townsend's slide showed a structure, Vega's photographs showed nothing but open ground. Vega's report, filed in August of 1970, documented her findings. She noted the absence of any structure at the indicated location and the lack of evidence for past construction or removal. She acknowledged the lab's conclusion that the image was genuine, but offered no explanation for the discrepancy. The report ended with a recommendation to archive the case as unresolved. The Park Service sent a final letter to Townsend in September, thanking him for his cooperation and informing him that no structure could be located at the site shown in his photograph. The letter included a copy of Vega's report. Townsend kept the slide and the correspondence, but did not pursue the matter further. In 1983, a researcher named Dr. Alan Greenberg conducted a study on photographic anomalies in national parks for a paper on perceptual psychology. He learned about the Lacey Point photograph through archived Park Service records. Greenberg contacted Townsend, who was still living in Ohio, and obtained permission to re-examine the slide. Greenberg had the slide digitized using high-resolution scanning equipment available in the early 1980s. The digital image confirmed what earlier analyses had shown: a rectangular structure, approximately 40 feet tall, present on the horizon. Greenberg used computer-assisted image enhancement to examine the structure in greater detail. The enhancements revealed what appeared to be horizontal banding or stratification in the object, suggesting it was composed of multiple layers or levels. Greenberg visited Lacey Point in 1984 and repeated Vega's survey. He found the same result: no structure at the indicated location. He also interviewed park staff and reviewed aerial photographs of the area taken in 1969. The aerial images showed no structures anywhere near Lacey Point. Greenberg published his findings in a Journal of Anomalous Phenomena in 1985. The paper was cautious in tone, presenting the data without claiming to explain it. The photograph appears to document an object that does not exist and has never existed in a measurable, verifiable form, Greenberg wrote. This creates a logical contradiction that current analytical methods cannot resolve. Richard Townsend passed away in 2006. His family donated his photographic archive, including the Lacey Point slide, to a historical society in Cleveland. The slide remains in their collection, stored in a climate-controlled vault. In 2011, a digital imaging specialist named Yukiyuki Nakamura analyzed the slide using modern computational techniques. Nakamura confirmed all previous findings. The image was genuine, unaltered, and showed a structure that could not be accounted for. Nakamura's report noted one additional detail: the structure's shadow, visible faintly in the enhanced digital image, fell at an angle consistent with the sun's position at the time the photograph was taken. "The shadow is real," Nakamura wrote. "It corresponds to a physical object casting it under natural light, but the object itself has no corresponding physical presence in any verifiable record." The Townsend family members who were present at Lacey Point in 1969, Barbara Townsend and the couple's 2 children, have all confirmed in separate interviews that they do not remember seeing any structure on the horizon. "We were looking at the desert," Barbara said in 2013. "It was empty, beautiful and empty. If there had been something 40 feet tall out there, we would have seen it. We would have talked about it, but we didn't, because it wasn't there. The slide shows otherwise. A structure, rectangular, solid, 40 feet tall, 2 miles from the camera, recorded in Kodachrome, preserved in cardboard and gelatin. Lacey Point remains a designated viewpoint in the Petrified Forest. The stone wall is still there. The desert stretches beyond it, unbroken and vast. Visitors photograph the landscape daily, capturing the same vista. Richard Townsend, photographed in 1969. The horizon is empty. It has always been empty, except for 17 minutes on July 23, 1969, when a camera recorded something that cast a shadow but left no trace. Cameras record what the eye misses, except when they record what was never there. Lacey Point sits on the eastern rim of the Painted Desert, a viewpoint overlooking miles of exposed badlands that stretch toward the horizon in layers of red, purple, and gray. The overlook was developed in 1957 with a small parking area and low stone wall built by the Civilian Conservation Corps. The view is uninterrupted, no trees, no structures, nothing between the observer and the distant mesas except open desert. Visibility on clear days extends for 15 to 20 miles. The terrain is stark and empty, shaped by erosion into rounded hills and shallow washes that change color with the angle of sunlight. The point is named after William Lacey, a surveyor who mapped portions of the Painted Desert in 1894. His notes describe the location as offering a prospect of uncommon clarity, where the eye may trace the land's contours without obstruction for distances that humble estimation. The view remains as Lacey described it, clear, vast, and unbroken. On July 23, 1969, a family from Ohio visited Lacey Point during a cross-country road trip. The family consisted of Richard and Barbara Townsend and their 2 teenage children. They arrived at the viewpoint in mid-afternoon, parked, and walked to the stone wall to admire the desert. Richard Townsend carried a Pentax Spotmatic camera, a 35mm single-lens reflex model popular among amateur photographers at the time. Townsend took several photographs. He photographed his family at the wall, the parking area, and the desert landscape. One photograph was a panoramic attempt. Townsend stood at the wall and took 3 overlapping images, intending to create a wide view of the Badlands when the prints were developed. He used slide film, Kodachrome 64, known for its color accuracy and fine grain. The Townsends continued their trip, visiting Grand Canyon, Zion, and Bryce Canyon, before returning to Ohio in early August. Townsend sent the film to a processing lab in Cleveland. The slides were returned 2 weeks later in standard cardboard mounts. Townsend reviewed them using a handheld slide viewer. The panoramic sequence contained an object that Townsend didn't remember seeing. In the rightmost frame, near the horizon line, there appeared to be a rectangular structure. It was distant but distinct, a vertical shape rising from the desert floor, dark against the lighter-colored terrain. Townsend held the slide up to a lamp and examined it closely. The structure looked artificial. It had clean edges and a geometric form that didn't match the natural contours of the surrounding landscape. Townsend asked his wife if she remembered seeing anything like that. She did not. He asked his children. Neither of them recalled any structure on the horizon. Townsend set the slide aside, assuming it was a processing error or a flaw in the film. 3 months later, in November of 1969, Townsend attended a photography club meeting in Cleveland. He brought several slides to share, including the panoramic images from Lacey Point. When he projected the slide containing the structure, another club member, a man named Gerald Hoffman, who worked as an optical engineer, asked about the object on the horizon. Townsend explained that he didn't know what it was. Hoffman asked to borrow the slide for examination. Townsend agreed. Hoffman took the slide to his workplace, a company that manufactured precision lenses, and examined it under magnification. He found no evidence of damage, double exposure, or contamination. The image appeared to be a genuine recording of something present in the landscape at the time the photograph was taken. Hoffman returned the slide in December and suggested Townsend contact the Park Service. Hoffman had calculated the approximate size and distance of the structure using the photograph's perspective and known landmarks. Based on his analysis, the object appeared to be roughly 40 feet tall and located approximately 2 miles from the viewpoint. Townsend wrote to the Petrified Forest National Park in January of 1970. He included a copy of the slide and a letter explaining when and where the photograph was taken. He asked if the Park Service could identify the structure. The letter was forwarded to the park's chief ranger, a man named Douglas Erickson. Erickson reviewed the slide and consulted topographic maps of the area. There was no structure at the indicated location. The terrain 2 miles from Lacey Point was open badlands, no buildings, no towers, no installations of any kind. Erickson checked with park maintenance staff to confirm no temporary structures had been erected in that area during summer of 1969. None had been. Erickson responded to Townsend in February, thanking him for the inquiry and stating that the Park Service had no record of any structure matching the description. Erickson suggested the object might be a distant mesa or rock formation that appeared artificial due to atmospheric conditions or the angle of the photograph. Townsend was unsatisfied with that explanation. He had studied the slide carefully. The object didn't look like a natural formation. It was too regular, too geometric. In March of 1970, he sent the slide to a photographic analysis laboratory in New York that specialized in forensic image examination. The lab was operated by a company called Image Tech Associates. The lab's report, completed in April, confirmed Hoffman's initial assessment. The slide showed no signs of tampering, double exposure, or processing defects. The structure in the image appeared to be a genuine element of the scene captured by the camera. The lab noted that the object's edges were sharp and its form was consistent with a solid vertical structure rather than a mirage or atmospheric distortion. The report also included an analysis of perspective lines and scale. Using the known distance to visible landmarks in the photograph, the lab estimated the structure was between 35 and 45 feet tall and located approximately 1.8 to 2.2 miles from the camera position. The report concluded with a statement. The object recorded in this image does not appear to be an artifact of the photographic process. It represents a physical feature present in the landscape at the time of exposure. Townsend sent copies of the lab report to the Park Service in May of 1970. Erickson reviewed the new information and forwarded it to the regional office in Santa Fe. In June, a Park Service investigator named Lorraine Vega was assigned to examine the matter. Vega visited Lacey Point in July of 1970, exactly 1 year after the Townsend's visit. She brought the slide, the lab report, and surveying equipment. She positioned herself at the approximate location where Townsend had stood and used a theodolite to measure angles and distances to landmarks visible in the photograph. She confirmed the perspective matched. She then sighted toward the location where the structure would have been. The area was empty, no structure, no foundation, no remnants of construction. Vega hiked to the site, a 2-mile walk across loose clay and eroded gullies. The terrain showed no signs of human activity, no concrete footings, no disturbed soil, no trash or debris. The ground was weathered and undisturbed, consistent with decades or centuries of natural erosion. Vega photographed the location from multiple angles. She compared her photographs to Townsend's slide. The landscape features matched: distant mesas, erosional patterns, the horizon line. but where Townsend's slide showed a structure, Vega's photographs showed nothing but open ground. Vega's report, filed in August of 1970, documented her findings. She noted the absence of any structure at the indicated location and the lack of evidence for past construction or removal. She acknowledged the lab's conclusion that the image was genuine, but offered no explanation for the discrepancy. The report ended with a recommendation to archive the case as unresolved. The Park Service sent a final letter to Townsend in September, thanking him for his cooperation and informing him that no structure could be located at the site shown in his photograph. The letter included a copy of Vega's report. Townsend kept the slide and the correspondence, but did not pursue the matter further. In 1983, a researcher named Dr. Alan Greenberg conducted a study on photographic anomalies in national parks for a paper on perceptual psychology. He learned about the Lacey Point photograph through archived Park Service records. Greenberg contacted Townsend, who was still living in Ohio, and obtained permission to re-examine the slide. Greenberg had the slide digitized using high-resolution scanning equipment available in the early 1980s. The digital image confirmed what earlier analyses had shown, a rectangular structure approximately 40 feet tall, present on the horizon. Greenberg used computer-assisted image enhancement to examine the structure in greater detail. The enhancements revealed what appeared to be horizontal banding or stratification in the object, suggesting it was composed of multiple layers or levels. Greenberg visited Lacey Point in 1984 and repeated Vega's survey. He found the same result: no structure at the indicated location. He also interviewed park staff and reviewed aerial photographs of the area taken in 1969. The aerial images showed no structures anywhere near Lacey Point. Greenberg published his findings in a Journal of Anomalous Phenomena in 1985. The paper was cautious in tone, presenting the data without claiming to explain it. The photograph appears to document an object that does not exist and has never existed in a measurable, verifiable form, Greenberg wrote. This creates a logical contradiction that current analytical methods cannot resolve. Richard Townsend passed away in 2006. His family donated his photographic archive, including the Lacey Point slide, to a historical society in Cleveland. The slide remains in their collection, stored in a climate-controlled vault. In 2011, a digital imaging specialist named Ryukiyuki Nakamura analyzed the slide using modern computational techniques. Nakamura confirmed all previous findings. The image was genuine, unaltered, and showed a structure that could not be accounted for. Nakamura's report noted one additional detail. The structure's shadow, visible faintly in the enhanced digital image, fell at an angle consistent with the sun's position at the time the photograph was taken. The shadow is real, Nakamura wrote. It corresponds to a physical object casting it under natural light, but the object itself has no corresponding physical presence in any verifiable record. The Townsend family members who were present at Lacey Point in 1969, Barbara Townsend and the couple's 2 children, have all confirmed in separate interviews that they do not remember seeing any structure on the horizon. "We were looking at the desert," Barbara said in 2013. "It was empty, beautiful and empty. If there had been something 40 feet tall out there, we would have seen it. We would have talked about it, but we didn't, because it wasn't there." The slide shows otherwise. A structure, rectangular, solid, 40 feet tall, 2 miles from the camera, recorded in Kodachrome, preserved in cardboard and gelatin. Lacey Point remains a designated viewpoint in the Petrified forest. The stone wall is still there. The desert stretches beyond it, unbroken and vast. Visitors photograph the landscape daily, capturing the same vista. Richard Townsend, photographed in 1969. The horizon is empty. It has always been empty, except for 17 minutes on July 23, 1969, when a camera recorded something that cast a shadow but left no trace. Names written in logbooks sometimes belong to people who were never there or people who were never found. Shindy Point is the highest elevation in the Petrified Forest, a mesa rising 6,300 feet above sea level at the northern edge of the Painted Desert. The summit is accessible via a steep 2-mile trail that begins at a trailhead near the park's northern entrance. The hike gains 400 feet of elevation through loose clay and exposed rock, challenging enough to deter casual visitors. The point offers panoramic views across miles of badlands, but the trail sees minimal traffic, perhaps 24 hikers per week during peak season, fewer in winter. A summit register was installed at Chinday Point in 1974 by the Park Service, placed in a weatherproof metal canister bolted to a cairn of stones at the trail's end. Summit registers are common in wilderness areas, simple logbooks where hikers record their name, date, time of arrival, and sometimes brief comments about weather or trail conditions. The practice serves multiple purposes. It provides a record of trail usage, aids in search and rescue operations, and offers hikers a sense of connection to others who've reached the same remote location. The Chinday Point Register was a standard spiral-bound notebook, replaced annually when filled. Rangers collected the completed registers and filed them in the park's administrative archives. The entries were rarely reviewed unless someone went missing or a trail incident required investigation. In March of 1989, a park ranger named Victor Salinas was tasked with inventorying archived materials as part of a records management project. Salinas worked through boxes of old documents, maintenance logs, visitor surveys, incident reports. Among the materials were 13 summit registers from Chinday Point, spanning 1974 through 1988. Salinas noticed something unusual while reviewing the 1977 register. An entry dated August 14th included a name that seemed familiar: Jennifer Cole, written in neat cursive with a time of 3:15 p.m. Salinas recognized the name from a missing persons bulletin he had seen years earlier. He checked the park's entrance records for August 14, 1977. No one named Jennifer Cole had signed in at either entrance station that day. Salinas pulled the missing persons file from park records. Jennifer Cole, age 23, had disappeared from Boulder, Colorado on August 10, 1977. She had left her apartment that morning, telling her roommate she was going hiking. She never returned. Her car was found 3 days later in a parking area near Boulder Falls. Extensive searches of the surrounding wilderness found no trace of her. The case remained open but inactive. The distance from Boulder to the Petrified Forest was approximately 600 miles. The timeline didn't match. If Cole had disappeared on August 10th, she couldn't have signed the Chinday Point register 4 days later without someone noticing she was alive, unless the entry wasn't made by her. Salinas continued reviewing the registers. He found more names that triggered recognition. Some were common enough to be coincidental: John Miller, David Martinez, Sarah Johnson. But others were distinctive. On May 3, 1981, someone signed as Robert Finch, 3:30 p.m. Robert Finch was a 51-year-old accountant who disappeared from Boise, Idaho on April 28, 1981. He had told his wife he was going to the office. His car was found in the office parking lot. He was never seen again. Salinas cross-referenced entrance records. No Robert Finch entered the park on May 3, 1981. He checked with both entrance stations to confirm no handwritten logs had been misplaced. The records were complete. Finch's name did not appear. Over the following weeks, Salinas systematically compared every name in the Chinday Point registers against park entrance records. He identified 17 entries between 1976 and 1988, where the name, date, and time in the summit register had no corresponding entrance record. He then cross-referenced those names against national missing persons databases accessible through law enforcement channels. 5 names matched active missing persons cases. All 5 individuals had disappeared from locations hundreds of miles from Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, New Mexico, Oregon, Washington. All had vanished within days or weeks of their names appearing in the Chinde Point register. None of the disappearances had any known connection to the Petrified Forest. Salinas prepared a report and submitted it to his supervisor, the park's chief ranger, a woman named Diane Kowalski. Kowalski reviewed the findings and contacted the FBI field office in Phoenix. In June of 1989, 2 agents arrived at the park to examine the registers and interview staff. The lead agent, whose name was redacted from later reports, but whose staff recalled as Agent Whitmore, spent 3 days reviewing the materials. He confirmed Salinas's findings. He also noted that the handwriting in the questionable entries appeared genuine. Each signature was distinct, written in different styles that suggested different individuals rather than a single person forging multiple names. Agent Whitmore interviewed rangers who had worked at Chinde Point during the relevant years. None remembered seeing anyone whose description matched the missing persons. He asked if it was possible for someone to reach the summit without signing in at an entrance station. Rangers explained that the park had fenced boundaries and monitored access points, but wilderness areas were not entirely secure. Determined hikers could theoretically enter on foot from adjacent public lands, though it would require significant effort. Whitmore requested handwriting samples from the families of the missing individuals. 3 families provided samples: letters, cards, documents bearing the signatures of their missing relatives. A forensic document examiner from the FBI analyzed the samples against the register entries. The results were inconclusive. The examiner's report, completed in August of 1989, stated that 2 of the signatures showed possible similarities to the known handwriting of the missing persons, but that definitive attribution was impossible, given the limited samples and the informal nature of the register entries. The other signatures could not be compared due to lack of reference material. The FBI closed its inquiry in September. The case summary noted the anomalies, but concluded there was insufficient evidence to establish a connection between the register entries and the missing persons cases. The report suggested the names might be coincidental, written by different individuals who happened to share names with missing persons, or possibly the work of someone familiar with the cases who chose to add their names as a morbid joke. Victor Salinas disagreed with that conclusion. 17 entries with no entrance records over 12 years, he said in an interview conducted in 2003. 5 of those names matching missing persons from other states, all disappearing close to the dates they supposedly signed our register. That's not coincidence, that's a pattern. He was asked what he believed happened. Salinas paused before answering. I don't know if those people were really here, but someone wrote their names. And whoever did it knew details, dates, times that would have made sense for a summit hike. Those aren't random, they're specific, they're intentional. Diane Kowalski retired from the Park Service in 1995. In a recorded conversation with a journalist in 2007, she acknowledged the unsettling nature of the findings. We wanted answers, she said. We wanted to know if those people had somehow made it to our park without us knowing, or if someone was playing a sick game, but we never found out. The FBI looked at it and walked away. We archived the registers and moved on. What else could we do? The Chinde Point Summit Register continued to be maintained after 1989. No further anomalies were reported, though the registers were no longer routinely compared against entrance records. In 2004, the Park Service transitioned to digital trail monitoring in some areas, but Chinde Point retained its paper register due to low traffic and remote location. In 2016, a researcher named Dr. Amelia Vasquez conducted a study on recreational trail usage in national parks. She reviewed historical summit registers from multiple parks, including Chinday Point. Vasquez noticed the 1976 to 1988 entries Salinas had flagged and attempted to follow up. She contacted families of the missing persons whose names appeared in the register. 2 families responded. One, the family of Michael Torres, who disappeared from Portland, Oregon in 1983, and whose name appeared in the register dated October 7, 1983, confirmed they had never heard of the Petrified Forest and had no reason to believe Michael had ever been to Arizona. The other family, relatives of a woman named Laura Caldwell, who vanished from Taos, New Mexico in 1979, said something that disturbed Vasquez. Laura's sister told her that Laura had kept a journal found after her disappearance. The journal's final entry, dated 3 days before Laura vanished, mentioned a place in the desert she wanted to visit but didn't name. The entry ended with a phrase, "Maybe I'll leave my name somewhere no one expects." Vasquez included a footnote about the Chinday Point register in her research paper, published in 2017. The footnote was brief and cautious, noting only that certain anomalies in historical trail registers remain unresolved and merit further investigation. The original registers from 1974 through 1988 are stored in the National Archives facility in Denver, transferred there in 2010 as part of a broader effort to preserve historic park documents. Access requires formal request and approval. Few researchers have requested them. The Summit Register at Chinday Point continues to collect entries. Hikers sign their names, record their dates and times, sometimes add brief notes about the weather or the view. The metal canister is weathered now, dented from years of exposure, but still functional. The notebook inside is replaced when filled, usually once per year. On quiet days, when no one is hiking, the register sits alone at the summit. The names inside are written in ink, permanent, preserved. Some belong to people who stood at that point and looked across the desert. Some belong to people whose presence in the park can be verified through entrance logs and ranger memory. And some belong to people who disappeared hundreds of miles away, whose names appear in careful handwriting next to dates and times that suggest they reached a summit they never officially approached. The cairn holding the register stands solid. The desert stretches below. The wind moves through constantly, indifferent to the questions written into stone and paper. 17 names that shouldn't be there. 5 that match people who vanished, and no way to know who wrote them, or why, or how they knew. Objects visible from the sky sometimes vanish before anyone reaches them on foot. Black Forest is an unofficial designation for a section of Badlands in the northwestern quarter of the Petrified Forest, named by early surveyors for the unusually dark coloration of petrified logs concentrated there. The logs contain high levels of manganese oxide, which gives them a deep purple-black appearance distinct from the reds, yellows, and creams more common elsewhere in the park. The area covers approximately 40 acres of eroded hills and shallow ravines, accessible only by hiking several miles from the nearest maintained trail. Few visitors venture there. The terrain is difficult, unstable clay slopes, no water sources, and summer temperatures that regularly exceed 100 degrees. The region was included in the National Monument boundary when the park was expanded in 1932, but it remained largely unstudied due to its remoteness. Early geological surveys noted the presence of petrified wood, but provided no detailed counts or measurements. The area's reputation was based primarily on anecdotal reports from rangers and surveyors who had passed through and observed what appeared to be extensive deposits of fossilized timber. In the spring of 1954, the U.S. Geological Survey conducted an aerial photographic survey of the Petrified Forest as part of a broader mapping initiative covering public lands across the Southwest. The survey used a military surplus aircraft equipped with precision cameras, flying systematic grid patterns at 5,000 feet elevation. The resulting photographs were high-resolution, black and white images intended for topographic analysis and resource documentation. The photographs of Black Forest showed what surveyors had described: a concentration of dark linear objects scattered across the clay hills, visible as distinct shapes against the lighter-colored ground. The objects appeared to be petrified logs, dozens of them, ranging from 10 to 30 feet in length. A preliminary count based on the photographs identified at least 67 separate specimens within the survey area. A second aerial survey was conducted in 1958 using updated camera equipment and color film. The images confirmed the presence of the logs. The count this time was 71 specimens. The photographs were filed with the USGS archive, and copies were sent to the Park Service for reference. In March of 1959, the Park Service authorized a ground survey of Black Forest. The project was intended to create a comprehensive inventory of petrified wood throughout the park, and Black Forest represented one of the last unsurveyed areas. A team of 4 researchers was assembled, led by Dr. Philip Garrett, a paleobotanist from the University of New Mexico. The team included 2 graduate students and a Park Service geologist named Sandra Miyamoto. The team departed from park headquarters on April 6, 1959, carrying the 1958 aerial photographs, surveying equipment, and supplies for a week-long expedition. They hiked into Black Forest, following GPS coordinates derived from the aerial images. The terrain matched the photographs, the same hills, the same ravines, the same exposed rock formations, but the logs were gone. Garrett's field notes from April 7th describe the team's initial confusion. Arrived at coordinates corresponding to densest concentration visible in aerial photos, he wrote. Ground surface shows scattered fragments of petrified wood, small pieces, none larger than 2 feet. No intact logs observed. Rechecked coordinates, position confirmed. Terrain features match photographs exactly, logs not present. The team spent 3 days systematically searching the area. They walked grid patterns, photographed the terrain, and collected soil samples. They found fragments of petrified wood, chips and broken pieces weathered smooth, but no complete logs. The largest intact piece they documented was 18 inches long. Miyamoto examined the ground closely. Petrified logs are heavy and dense. When they erode out of sedimentary layers or are moved by natural forces, they leave traces, depressions in clay, disturbed soil, concentrations of fragments along erosion channels. Miyamoto found none of that. The clay surfaces were smooth and weathered, showing no recent disturbance. There were no drag marks, no areas of compressed soil, no patterns suggesting logs had been present and subsequently removed. The team expanded their search beyond the immediate survey area, hiking to adjacent hills and valleys. They found more fragments, but no intact logs. On April 9th, Garrett radioed park headquarters requesting clarification on the aerial photographs. He wanted to confirm the coordinates and ensure the team was searching the correct location. Park headquarters confirmed the coordinates. A ranger named Douglas Whitmore, who had overflown Black Forest in a small aircraft in 1956, was consulted. Whitmore remembered the area clearly. "I saw the logs," he said in a statement dated April 10th, 1959. "Big ones, dark-colored. They were lying all over those hills. You couldn't miss them. I remember thinking we should get a team out there to document them before they got stolen." Garrett's team completed their survey on April 11th and returned to headquarters. Their report, filed on April 14th, documented the absence of logs and included photographs of the empty terrain. The report noted the discrepancy between aerial observations and ground findings, but offered no explanation. Garrett recommended a follow-up aerial survey to determine if the logs were still visible from the air. The follow-up survey was conducted on May 2, 1959. A Park Service aircraft flew over Black Forest at the same altitude and flight path used in the 1958 survey. The photographer, a man named Roger Callahan, took multiple exposures covering the entire area. The photographs showed empty ground, no logs, no dark linear shapes, only clay hills and scattered rock outcrops identical to what Garrett's team had found on foot. Callahan's images matched the ground-level photographs taken by the survey team. The logs that had been clearly visible in 1954 and 1958 were no longer present. The Park Service compared the three sets of aerial photographs, 1954, 1958, and 1959. The terrain features were identical. The hills had the same contours. The ravines followed the same paths. The exposed rock layers showed the same patterns, but the logs visible in the first two surveys were absent in the third. A review panel was convened in June of 1959. The panel included geologists, photographers, and Park Service administrators. They examined the photographs under magnification, looking for signs of image manipulation or processing errors. They found none. The 1954 and 1958 images were genuine records of what the cameras had captured. The 1959 images were equally genuine. The logs had been there, then they weren't. The panel considered explanations. Theft was discussed but dismissed. Moving 60 to 70 logs weighing several tons each from a remote location would require vehicles, equipment, and access roads. Black Forest had none of those. The terrain was impassable to trucks. Human removal seemed impossible. Natural erosion was considered. Could the logs have been weathered away or buried by sediment between 1958 and 1959? Miyamoto's soil analysis showed no evidence of recent sediment deposition or significant erosion. The clay surfaces were stable. If erosion had been rapid enough to bury or destroy dozens of logs in less than a year, there would be visible signs, fresh gullies, sediment fans, altered topography. The landscape showed none of that. A geological consultant, Dr. Howard Lansing from Arizona State University, was brought in to review the findings. Lansing visited Black Forest in July of 1959 and conducted his own survey. He confirmed Garrett's observations. "The logs are not there," Lansing wrote in his report dated July 28th. "The ground shows no indication they were ever there, except for small fragments consistent with naturally occurring petrified wood deposits. The aerial photographs clearly show large specimens that do not exist on the ground. I cannot reconcile this contradiction." The review panel's final report, completed in September of 1959, acknowledged the discrepancy but reached no conclusion. The report stated, "Aerial photographic evidence documents the presence of significant petrified wood deposits in the Black Forest area during surveys conducted in 1954 and 1958. Ground surveys conducted in 1959 found no corresponding deposits. Subsequent aerial surveys confirmed the absence observed on the ground. The mechanism by which this change occurred is not determined. Further investigation is recommended. No further investigation was funded. The case was archived. Black Forest remained a remote, rarely visited section of the park. In 1973, a graduate student named Kevin Burrows reviewed archived USGS photographs for a thesis on erosion patterns in Badlands environments. He discovered the Black Forest images and noticed the discrepancy. Burrows contacted Dr. Garrett, who had retired from the University of New Mexico but still remembered the 1959 survey clearly. "I've thought about it for years," Garrett told Burrows in a recorded interview conducted in 1974. "We were in the right place. The terrain matched. The hills, the rock layers. Everything corresponded to the photographs except the logs. They should have been there, dozens of them. But there was nothing, just fragments, and no evidence they'd been removed. Burroughs hiked to Black Forest in 1975 and conducted his own survey. He found the same thing Garrett had found 16 years earlier, fragments of petrified wood, no intact logs, no disturbance in the soil. Burroughs included a chapter about Black Forest in his thesis, but his advisor suggested removing it, calling it speculative and unsupported. Burroughs complied. The chapter was deleted before publication. The original aerial photographs remain in the USGS archive. They can be requested and viewed. The 1954 and 1958 images show logs clearly, dark shapes against pale clay, arranged across hills in patterns consistent with natural deposition. The 1959 images show the same landscape without the logs. Sandra Miyamoto, the Park Service geologist who was part of Garrett's team, retired in 1998. In an interview conducted in 2006, she was asked if she had ever returned to Black Forest. Once, she said, in 1982, I wanted to see if anything had changed. It hadn't. Still just fragments. Still no sign of where the logs went or how they could have disappeared. She paused before continuing. The thing that bothered me most was the soil. If you remove something heavy from soft ground, you leave a mark. The ground remembers. But Black Forest didn't remember. It was like those logs had never been there, except we had photographs proving they were. Black Forest remains part of the Petrified Forest. It appears on park maps as undeveloped wilderness. Hikers occasionally venture there, though the difficulty of the terrain discourages most visitors. Those who do reach the area find what Garrett found in 1959, clay hills, exposed rock, and scattered fragments of petrified wood. The aerial photographs are dated and filed. 1954, 1958. Clear images of logs that should still be there. 1959. Empty ground that matched what the survey team found. Somewhere between the camera's lens and the surface of the Earth, 67 objects ceased to exist. And the ground they rested on forgot they were ever there.